You have been told that the world is stable, that knowledge accumulates, that history is a straight line. But beneath every certainty is a fracture, and beneath every fracture is an abyss. What you are about to hear is not a comfort, but a dismantling and erosion of everything you mistake for solid. You assume memory is a chain, that your life has been unfolding link by link, that yesterday produced today, and that today will inevitably produce tomorrow. You believe you are the sum of everything that has already happened to you, that the past is a fixed structure, and you are simply its continuation. But the first fracture is here. Memory is not a chain at all. It is a hallucination you rehearse, until you mistake it for continuity. Psychology has shown this with unnerving clarity. Elizabeth Loftus, one of the most cited researchers in the field of memory, demonstrated that entire false memories can be implanted with ease. In her experiments, participants were told stories of being lost in a shopping mall as a child. Many subjects, after repeated suggestion, came to believe it had happened. Not only did they remember it, they constructed detailed sensory impressions: the layout of the store, the smell of popcorn, the voice of a parent calling their name. Their minds fabricated the event, but once accepted, it became indistinguishable from real memory. And when later told the event was false, many still felt an emotional residue, as though some part of them insisted it had happened anyway. This is not an isolated quirk. Entire groups of people have been convinced they witnessed events that never occurred, simply because of repeated suggestion. The psychological record is full of false eyewitness testimonies, confident, consistent, persuasive, and utterly wrong. Memory, then, is not a record of the past. It is a reconstruction built in the present. You are not carrying the past within you. You are fabricating it as you go. Neuroscience deepens this wound. Every act of remembering destabilizes the neural pattern that encodes the memory. To recall is not to retrieve, but to rewrite. The original trace is never replayed. It is pulled out, altered by present emotion, context, and bias, then restored as something new. Each recollection edits the file. Every memory you revisit drifts further from what really happened, until what you are left with is not the past at all, but a series of distorted echoes. What does this mean for identity? You call yourself by a name, trace yourself back through childhood, assign meaning to traumas and triumphs. But all of those depend on memory, and if memory is mutable, then so are you. The person you believe you are is an edited hallucination. You are not continuous. You are a palimpsest, an ancient manuscript, scraped clean and rewritten so many times that the original words can never be recovered. Consider déjà vu, that eerie sense that you have lived this moment before. Neuroscientists suggest it emerges when the brain misfires and treats present perception as a memory. But think carefully if the sensation of having experienced something is indistinguishable from actually having experienced it. How do you know the rest of your memories are not the same kind of error? If you can feel nostalgia for an event that never happened, then the entire fabric of your past collapses into uncertainty. And then, the final cruelty. Memory is all you have to prove? That you existed yesterday. The body replaces most of its cells over time. Your thoughts vanish the moment they appear. The only evidence you possess of continuity is the story you tell yourself of fragile hallucination, stitched together from unstable reconstructions. So, ask yourself now, if every recollection is unreliable, if every self is just a fiction edited and re-edited, who exactly is it that you think you are? You move through life as though time is a straight line, a past behind you, a present under your feet, a future rushing toward you. Every decision you make relies on this belief that the past is fixed, the present is fleeting, and the future is still unwritten. But physics does not agree with you. In fact, the deeper you look, the less time resembles anything like a line at all. Einstein's theory of relativity shattered the everyday illusion of universal time. To him, there is no single clock ticking for everyone, no shared present. Time flows differently depending on speed and gravity. A clock on an airplane runs faster than one on the ground. A clock on a satellite ticks differently than one in your pocket. There is no fixed now. What you call the present is just a local condition, fragile and relative. This means that the moment you think you inhabit is not universal. It is just yours. Someone else, moving differently through space, is not living in the same now as you. And if no universal present exists, then what does it even mean to say that time flows? The implications are worse than you want them to be. Minkowski, Einstein's collaborator, proposed that reality is not a flow, but a block. All events past, present, future already exist in a four-dimensional structure called spacetime. You do not move through time. You are fixed inside of it, like a fly trapped in amber. The moment you call the future already exists. The moment you call the past has never gone away. You are not traveling. You are already there. Every choice you believe you are about to make is already carved into the geometry of spacetime, but you do not experience reality as a block. You experience it as motion. Why? Neuroscience offers one brutal possibility. Your brain manufactures the sensation of temporal flow as a survival function. Experiments on patients with brain lesions reveal something chilling. When the temporal lobes are damaged, the sense of passage collapses. These people no longer feel the flow of time. They exist in fragments, perceiving isolated moments without continuity. Their experiences are not broken. Rather, they reveal what time looks like when your brain stops stitching it into a narrative. In other words, what you call the present moving forward is not a property of the universe. It is a hallucination generated by neural machinery. Philosophy has circled this terror for centuries. Augustine wrote that time is impossible to define because the past no longer exists, the future does not yet exist, and the present is too fleeting to hold. If only the present is real, then nothing endures. But if past and future exist in some sense, then you are already trapped inside a block where every outcome is immutable. Either way, your freedom collapses. Consider also the psychological distortions of time. Under stress, moments stretch, seconds dilate into eternities. Under anesthesia, hours vanish without trace. In deep meditation, minutes blur into timelessness. None of these distortions change the clock. They change you, which reveals the truth. Your sense of time is not anchored to reality. It is an effect of consciousness, as fragile as memory, as deceptive as a dream dot. So what is time, then? If physics says it is a frozen block, if neuroscience says flow is a hallucination, if philosophy says its existence is paradoxical, then what is left for you to trust? The only thing you are certain of is that you are passing through something. But passing through what? And here the fracture deepens. If the future already exists, then your death has already happened. You are just not at that coordinate yet. The end of your story is not something waiting to be written. It is already written, already there, already happening in another slice of space-time. You cannot escape it because you are already inside it. You are only blind to it because your brain edits your perception to keep you moving forward, like a character trapped in a film reel, forced to believe each frame is new, while the ending has always been fixed dot. So ask yourself, if all moments already exist, if you are simply sliding along a frozen structure that cannot be altered, what exactly do you mean when you say you are alive right now? You believe you are the one thinking these thoughts. You believe there is a you behind your eyes, a central witness sitting in the skull, observing the world, making choices, guiding the body. But neuroscience has been carving away at this illusion for decades, and the results are intolerable. Start with Benjamin. Liebig's experiments in the 1980s. Participants were asked to perform a simple task: flex their wrist whenever they felt the urge, while noting the exact moment they became aware of their intention. Electrodes measured their brain activity. The shocking result: the brain showed readiness potentials, buildup of electrical activity hundreds of milliseconds before participants reported deciding to act. In other words, your brain initiates an action before you decide. Conscious will does not cause movement. It reports it after the fact. You are not the driver. You are the passenger, inventing the story of control. Later replications deepen the wound. Brain scans could predict decisions seconds before participants were aware of making them. Free will, the cherished foundation of morality, law, and identity, crumbles here. The you that chooses is not in charge. It is a late commentary on processes already unfolding. The sense of agency is a retroactive hallucination. But if you are not steering, then what are you? Split brain experiments provide another cut. When the corpus callosum is severed, the two hemispheres of the brain function independently. Present one hemisphere with an image, and it will respond appropriately, while the other hemisphere denies seeing anything. Yet each hemisphere insists it is a unified self. Two selves inside the same skull, each unaware of the other's blindness. Which one is you? Both? Neither? If consciousness can fracture this easily, how can it ever have been whole? Philosophy has always warned you. David Hume declared you could find no core self, only a bundle of perceptions, flashing one after another, with no permanent substance. Buddhism long ago denied the existence of a fixed self, calling it anatta, no soul, no enduring entity, only processes flowing and dissolving. Modern neuroscience has caught up. The self is not a thing, but an emergent pattern, fragile, unstable, contingent. Even the continuity of your thoughts is a fabrication. Experiments on attentional blink show that in rapid sequences, entire moments of perception vanish without you noticing. In deep meditation, awareness of I flickers out, leaving only bare sensation. Under anesthesia, the self collapses. Instantly, you can be switched off and on like a light. What kind of entity can disappear and reappear so easily? Worse still, the brain generates a default mode network, a set of regions that chatter to each other when you are not focused on a task. This network constructs the narrative of me, weaving past and future, binding your memories and fantasies into a continuous story. But when this network is disrupted through psychedelics, trauma, or neurological damage, the sense of self dissolves. The narrative vanishes, and yet perception continues. The world is still seen, sounds still heard, emotions still felt, without a self at the center. This means consciousness does not require a you at all. So what are you? Then, a voice narrating after the fact. A pattern of neural activity pretending to be a captain. A hallucination that refers to itself. And here is the fracture you cannot close. If you are not making your choices, if the self is a bundle that can be split or erased, if perception continues without a center, then who is listening to these words right now? You think history is a record, a long archive of facts, causes, and effects, stacked neatly into chronology. You think the past has been preserved, written into books, carved into monuments, stored in libraries. But history is not a record. It is an interpretation, rewritten each time someone remembers, each time someone teaches, each time someone forgets. Consider first the fragility of records. Most of human existence, hundreds of thousands of years, left no written trace. Civilization itself is a blink in evolutionary time. What you call history is less than 5,000 years of selective inscription, and even that sliver is riddled with loss. The Library of Alexandria burned, erasing centuries of knowledge. Countless manuscripts decayed into dust. Oral traditions warped with each retelling. You live in a world where nearly all of the past has been obliterated. The fragments that remain are accidents of survival, not complete accounts. Your image of history is a puzzle assembled from broken shards, most pieces missing forever. And yet, even those fragments are not reliable. Victors write history. Every empire crafts its narrative, painting itself as necessary, righteous, inevitable. The losers vanish, their voices silenced, their truths erased. What you inherit as fact is already propaganda, filtered through power. Colonial histories reduced entire civilizations to footnotes. Political regimes altered documents, photographs, testimonies. Stalin literally purged officials from images, rewriting collective memory with ink and blade. The past, you think, you know, is a stage set, assembled to justify the present, but the corruption runs deeper still. Psychology reveals that collective memory is as malleable as personal memory. Studies of flashbulb memories, like where people were on September 11th, show that confidence in detail remains high even as accuracy decays. Groups reinforce each other's false recollections, building myths that harden into consensus. What begins as rumor becomes fact. What begins as speculation becomes history. Entire populations misremember together, their errors fossilized into textbooks. Archaeology offers its own abyss. Göbekli Tepe, a site in Turkey over 11,000 years old, shattered assumptions about when complex human societies began. Civilizations rose earlier, faster, stranger than textbooks had claimed. How many other forgotten cities lie buried under deserts, jungles, oceans? How much of history has been lost not to fire, but to time itself? Each discovery does not clarify it, destabilizes. Every unearthed artifact makes the timeline wobble. Now confront this. If history is mostly missing, if the fragments that remain are biased, if collective memory mutates, if archaeology constantly rewrites the timeline, then what? Do you actually know about the past? You think you live on stable ground, built on thousands of years of continuity. But what if the ground beneath you is not a foundation, but a swamp of distortions and erasures? Even your own life confirms this. Try to remember your childhood. Most of it is gone. Try to reconstruct yesterday in perfect detail. You cannot. Your personal history is fragmented, rewritten, warped. Why would humanity's history be any different? So when you say you know who you are because you know where you come from, realize the flaw. Both your personal memory and your collective history are fabrications, selective narratives built on ruins. And the question you cannot evade: if the past itself is uncertain, how can you ever be certain of who you are now? You believe you are real because you have a name, a history, a sense of continuity. You believe there is an I at the center, the one who remembers, who suffers, who plans, who narrates. But strip away the narration, and what remains? Modern psychology suggests the self is not an object, but a process, an ongoing story the brain constructs. The narrative self, as researchers call it, is built by the default mode network, those brain regions that activate when your mind drifts, when you think about the past, the future, or your identity. This system strings events into a timeline, weaves emotions into meaning, and stitches memory into coherence. But it is a fabrication. When the network is disrupted by psychedelics, brain injury, or meditation, the narrative collapses. Perception continues, but there is no narrator at the center. Life unfolds without a self to claim it. Consider trauma. Victims often describe their stories being shattered. What this means neurologically is that the brain cannot integrate the event into its ongoing self-narrative. The fragments exist, but they resist binding. Therapy is the work of re-narration, constructing a story that makes the fragments fit again. This reveals the fragile truth. Identity is not discovered, it is authored. And like any author, you are. Constantly revising, omitting, embellishing. The story of you is not a record but a draft, rewritten until it feels smooth enough to believe. Philosophy foresaw this. Nietzsche called the self a multiplicity, a battlefield of drives, and instincts temporarily unified under a false flag of identity. Buddhism denied the permanence of self entirely, pointing to the ever-shifting aggregates of body, sensation, perception, thought, and consciousness. Hume insisted that when he looked inside, he found no I, only a bundle of perceptions. The self has always been a ghost, yet one you cling to as though it were flesh. Even linguistics betrays you. The word I is not a thing but a function, a pronoun that points to whoever speaks. It has no essence, only shifting reference. When you say, I, what are you actually pointing to? A body? A momentary thought? A memory? The function persists, but the referent changes constantly. There is no single object to which I refers, only a continuous pointing at what is already slipping away. Split-brain patients prove this with violence. Each hemisphere, cut off from the other, constructs its own self. Each one insists it is the center. But which is correct? Both claim authorship of actions, even when only one hemisphere knows the stimulus. This means the sense of I can multiply. If it can split in one body, then what prevents it from fracturing in yours right now, without you even noticing? You? Self is a story told to itself, a recursive hallucination. It speaks, then listens, then believes. It authors and consumes its own fiction. And if that story stopped, if the narration fell silent, you would vanish without residue. So the fracture opens. If the self is nothing but a story, authored and revised by processes you do not control, then who exactly is telling this story to you now? You believe your senses deliver reality to you, as though sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell are windows opening onto the world. But neuroscience insists otherwise. Perception is not a reception of truth, but a construction your brains. Best guess, a hallucination stabilized by feedback from the outside. Consider vision. Photons strike your retina, but the data they provide is fragmentary, ambiguous, incomplete. Your brain fills in gaps, corrects distortions, invents continuity. The blind spot in your retina should leave a hole in your sight, yet you never see it. Your brain fabricates detail to cover it up. Optical illusions exploit these shortcuts. Two lines of equal length appear unequal. A static image seems to move. A hollow mask appears convex. You are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing what your brain has decided to generate. Anil Seth, a cognitive neuroscientist, calls perception a controlled hallucination. Your brain constantly predicts what the world should look, sound, and feel like, and then updates these predictions with sensory input. You do not perceive raw data. You perceive the brain's predictions, adjusted to fit external signals. Hallucination is not the exception. It is the rule. The only difference between sanity and psychosis is that in psychosis, the hallucination is less constrained by reality. Consider hearing. When you listen to a conversation in a noisy room, you do not actually hear every word. Your brain reconstructs them, filling in blanks from context. When an ambiguous sound is played, what you hear depends on what you expect to hear. The famous Laurel versus Yanni illusion proved this. Identical sound waves split audiences, half hearing one word, half hearing another. Which is real? Neither. Both. Your brain decided. Smell and taste too are shaped by suggestion. Wine. Experts describe notes of oak, berries, leather in a glass of cheap wine if they believe it is expensive. Perception bends to belief, and touch, your most intimate sense, can be tricked. In the rubber hand illusion, when a fake hand is stroked in sync with your hidden real hand, you begin to feel ownership of the fake. Your brain remaps your body image, claiming plastic as flesh. If perception is guesswork, then the world you experience is not reality, but a simulation running inside your skull. The external world is not denied. It supplies constraints, like scaffolding, but what you perceive is your brain's model of it. And that model is only as good as your predictions, which means you do not live in the world. You live inside your brain's hallucination of the world. Philosophy anticipated this centuries ago. Kant argued that you never know the thing in itself, the world as it is. You know only the phenomena, the appearances your mind constructs. The raw noumenon, the real world beyond perception, is forever inaccessible. Modern neuroscience only reinforces this. You are trapped in a simulation of your own making, unable to step outside to compare it with reality itself. Now let the fracture widen. If perception is a hallucination constrained by input, then how do you know when you are hallucinating too much or too little? How do you know that what you call sanity is not simply the most common hallucination? If all experience is fabricated, then what grounds do you have for saying anything is real at all? So answer this. If the world you see, hear, and touch is nothing but the brain's construction, then what is left when the construction collapses? You think words are tools labels attached to things, vessels carrying meaning from one mind to another. You think language describes the world, but language does not describe. It distorts, confines, reshapes. You have never known the world outside of words, and because of this, you have never known the world at all. Consider the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the claim that language shapes perception and thought. For decades, linguists debated its strength, but evidence continues to accumulate. Speakers of languages that have no word for blue literally perceive shades of blue differently than those whose languages do. The Himba people of Namibia, whose language categorizes colors differently, are faster at distinguishing greens that English speakers see as identical, yet slower at distinguishing shades of blue. Your perception bends under the categories your language provides. You do not see the world as it is. You see the world as your grammar allows. Time itself is enslaved to words. In English, time runs horizontally. You look forward to the future, back on the past. But in Aymara, a South American language, the past is in front of you because you can see it, while the future is behind you because you cannot. Studies show Aymara speakers gesture differently, literally embodying a different spatial model of time. Even something as basic as where the future is depends not on reality, but on vocabulary. Then consider how language manipulates memory. Elizabeth Loftus showed how a single verb changes recollection. When participants watched a car crash, those asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other recalled higher speeds and more broken glass than those asked how fast the cars were going when they contacted. One word altered the memory of an entire event. If a sentence can distort memory, what has a lifetime of sentences done to you? Philosophers have long distrusted language. Wittgenstein warned that the limits of your language are the limits of your world. Nietzsche called truths illusions we have forgotten are illusions, metaphors so worn down they masquerade as reality. Every noun reifies process, turning flux into object. You say tree as though it were static, but the tree is growth, decay, photosynthesis, a storm of matter and energy. Language freezes it into a false solidity. And because you live inside language, you mistake the frozen symbols for reality itself. Even the word I betrays you. It suggests a unified self, a stable entity. But neuroscience shows the self is a process, not a thing. The pronoun deceives you into believing continuity where none exists. Your entire sense of being is scaffolded on a trick of grammar. And notice how language hides violence in plain sight. Civilians are collateral damage. Torture becomes enhanced interrogation. Lies become alternative facts. Words do not merely describe reality. They sculpt it, conceal it, mutilate it. You live inside a world not of events, but of sentences about events, carefully filtered and manipulated. So if language shapes perception, if it dictates memory, if it freezes flux into false solidity, if it fabricates a self, if it hides reality, behind euphemism, what do you really know outside of words? And here is the fracture that cannot heal. If all your thoughts arrive in language, if even your private inner life is built out of words, then what are you without them? You move as though you choose. You wake, you eat, you work, you rest believing that each decision flows from some inner authorship, some sovereign self directing the sequence. But science, philosophy, and psychology converge on a darker truth. Free will is not freedom at all. It is a story your brain tells after the fact. The cracks first appear in Benjamin Levitt's famous experiments. He asked participants to flex a finger whenever they felt the urge, while watching a clock to note the exact moment they became aware of deciding. Electrodes measured their brain activity. What he found was devastating. Neural readiness potentials appeared hundreds of milliseconds before subjects reported deciding. The brain had already begun the action before the decision entered consciousness. What you call choice is a report, not a cause. Later research extended this horizon. Using fMRI, scientists could predict with startling accuracy which button the subject would press several seconds before the subject felt they had chosen. The conscious will is a latecomer, a narrator weaving agency into events already unfolding. You are not free. You are an echo. Philosophy has always suspected this. Spinoza wrote that people believe themselves free because they are conscious of their actions, but ignorant of the causes. Schopenhauer declared, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Nietzsche mocked free, while as the invention of theologians to justify punishment. Every attempt to locate true autonomy collapses into determinism, randomness, or illusion. Consider determinism. If the universe obeys physical law, then every particle, including those in your brain, moves according to prior causes. Your decision was inscribed in the Big Bang itself. Consider indeterminism. If quantum randomness plays a role, then choices are not authored by you, but by chance. Neither path grants freedom. Either everything you do was inevitable, or everything you do is meaningless noise. Psychology sharpens the blade. The majority of your behaviors are unconscious habits, biases, heuristics. Priming experiments show that a word, an image, even a fleeting smell, can alter decisions without awareness. Subjects exposed to words associated with old age walked more. Slowly afterward, unaware of the influence. Hungry judges gave harsher sentences before lunch and lighter ones after. You call these judgments free, but they are swayed by forces beneath thought. And then there is the split-brain patient. Two hemispheres, two centers of action. One hand buttons the shirt, the other unbuttons it. When asked why, the speaking hemisphere fabricates a reason, unaware of the other's motives. The brain generates choice, but the conscious self rationalizes it after. What you call free will is not freedom, it is confabulation. Even morality collapses under this weight. Punishment assumes choice, praise assumes agency. But if no one freely chooses, what justifies blame? You punish the criminal for actions determined by neurons, hormones, histories, none of which they authored. You praise the hero for courage, born of genetics and circumstance. The foundation of justice rots away when freedom is exposed as fiction. So return to yourself. You are reading these words. Did you choose to? Or were you carried here by a chain of causes, your curiosity, your fatigue, the shape of your day, the algorithms that led you? If so, what part of you remains that is not determined, not random, not illusory? And the question you cannot escape, if you are not free, then who, exactly, is imprisoned inside this body, forced to live out choices? Already made? You move through the day, convinced that your body belongs to you, that it is your vessel, your possession, your instrument. But this belief fractures under even the slightest scrutiny. The body is not yours. It is an ecosystem, a colony, a temporary configuration of matter that never was, and never will be, under your control. Start with biology. You are not a singular organism. You are a host for trillions of microbes, bacteria, fungi, archaea, outnumbering your human cells. The microbiome in your gut determines mood, digestion, immunity, even decision-making. Experiments show that transplanting gut bacteria from one mouse to another alters behavior. Shy mice become bold. Bold mice become timid. Your sense of personality is influenced by microbes that do not even share your DNA. Who is choosing you or the colony living inside you? Your cells themselves are not permanent. The lining of your stomach replaces itself every few days. Skin cells slough away and renew. Blood cells cycle out in months. Even neurons, once thought fixed, undergo replacement and rewiring. The you of a decade ago shares almost none of the same matter with the you reading this now. If the body is replaced cell by cell, what exactly is it that endures? And the body does not obey you. Your heart beats without permission. Your lungs breathe in sleep. Hormones surge, moods shift, impulses arise. You do not command them. You endure them. The endocrine system floods you with chemicals that make you lust, fear, rage, despair. You ride these waves and call them yours, but they are as involuntary as weather. Consider phantom limb syndrome. Amputees feel pain, itching, or pressure in limbs that no longer exist. The body persists as a neurological map, even when flesh is gone. The you that feels pain is not in the limb, but in the brain's model. The body you inhabit is not. The body that exists, it is a hallucinated projection. Then there is alien hand syndrome, where damage to the corpus callosum causes a hand to move independently, buttoning a shirt while the other unbuttons it, reaching for objects against the conscious will. The body does not obey. It acts, and the self struggles to explain. History, 2, mocks the idea of ownership. Bodies have been enslaved, bought, sold, mutilated. Power structures have always treated flesh as property, as resource, as machine. Even now, your labor is purchased, your health commodified, your attention extracted. You say the body is yours, but society claims otherwise. And when death comes, the body proves its final betrayal. It decomposes, feeds bacteria, worms, soil. It was never yours. It was matter on loan, temporarily assembled in a shape you mistook. For self, you live in a body, but you do not own it. You ride it like a borrowed animal, half wild, mostly indifferent to your commands. It will carry you until it collapses, and then it will return to the swarm of matter from which it came. So, the question stands, sharp and unavoidable. If the body is not yours, if it never was, then who or what is it that you think is living inside it? You live as though memory is the thread of your identity, as though every moment that led you here is faithfully preserved in some archive of the mind. But memory is not an archive. It is a forgery. Every recollection you hold is reconstructed, altered, contaminated, and often entirely false. Psychological research has exposed the fragility of memory. Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated that false memories can be implanted with disturbing ease. In controlled experiments, Subjects were convinced. They had been lost in a shopping mall as children, or that they had seen Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, both impossible events. Yet participants defended these false memories with confidence, describing details, emotions, sensations. The brain did not recall. It invented. Memory does not work like a tape recorder. It works like a palimpsest. Every time you recall an event, you destabilize it. Neurons fire, connections reconfigure, and the memory is rewritten. What you remember today is not what you experienced then. It is what your mind reconstructed in the present, polluted by suggestion, emotion, and context. You carry a story, not a history. Consider the Mandela effect. Masses of people insisting that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, or that the Berenstain Bears were spelled Berenstein. These are not trivial errors. They reveal the collective unreliability of memory. Entire populations misremember, fabricating an alternate past that feels more real than the documented one. Your own childhood is a fog. You think you remember your first day at school or a family vacation, but those images are stitched together from photographs, stories told by others, flashes of sensory fragments. You cannot distinguish what you truly experienced from what you have been told. Memory is not yours. It is a narrative constructed by your culture, your family, your present self. Even traumatic memories, which feel seared into the mind, are unstable. Neurological studies show that traumatic recollections are fragmented, inconsistent, and deeply susceptible to distortion. Victims often remember the horror, but misplace details, times, or faces. The events that shaped you most are also the ones most contaminated. Now imagine the implications. The crimes of history, the truths of nations, the stories of civilizations, these too are memories. And they too are reconstructed, rewritten, falsified. National histories are curated lies, collective memories edited and enforced. What is taught in schools is not truth, but consensus hallucination. If your memories are forged, then who are? You? You are not a continuum of lived experience. You are a fragile fiction, retold each morning in the mirror, convinced it was always so. So the question burns in silence. If memory is a manufactured lie, then what remains of you in the story? Collapses? You imagine time as a line passed behind you, present beneath you, future ahead. But physics insists that this picture is a deception. The universe does not care for your sense of sequence. What you call time may be nothing more than the mind's desperate attempt to stitch together static frames into a flowing illusion. Einstein shattered the idea of absolute time. Relativity shows that time runs differently depending on motion and gravity. Clocks on satellites tick faster than clocks on Earth. A twin traveling at near light speed would age more slowly than the one left behind. There is no universal now. Time is elastic, relative, personal. What you feel as a shared present is already fragmented. In physics, the block universe hypothesis suggests that past, present, and future all coexist simultaneously. Every event, from your first breath to your last, already exists in spacetime, like locations on a map. You are not moving through time. You are fixed within it. Your sense of flowing forward is merely perspective, the way a needle moves across. A record that is already pressed in its entirety. Neuroscience deepens the fracture. The brain does not perceive events in real time. It delays, integrates, edits. You live in a stitched-together hallucination, approximately half a second behind reality. Your present is not present. It is already gone, reconstructed just late. Enough to maintain the illusion of continuity. Even the flow of cause and effect begins to unravel. In quantum mechanics, certain interpretations suggest retrocausality, that present measurements determine past states. Experiments with entangled particles imply that outcomes in the now ripple backward, altering what was. If causality is not stable, then neither is the arrow of time. Think of history. You believe events progress, empires rise and fall, technologies evolve. But every historical narrative is built on selective emphasis, omission, myth, the flow of Vez. Time, you are taught, is nothing but a curated order forced upon chaos. Remove the ordering, and history collapses into simultaneity. Wars, births, deaths, discoveries all piled into one timeless heap. Your personal time is equally fragile. Consider déjà vu, the eerie sense of having lived this moment before. Studies suggest it arises from a glitch in memory processing, the brain misfiring between recognition and novelty. But on a deeper level, déjà vu whispers of time folding onto itself, of the present repeating, of your life caught in loops you cannot perceive. And then there is death. You assume it awaits in the future, a point on your timeline yet to be reached. But if the block universe is true, your death is not ahead. It is already written, already existing, just as present as the moment you are living now. You are dead. Already, and alive already, forever frozen in spaceti me. So ask yourself, if time is not a flow, but a prison of fixed moments, what does it mean to believe in tomorrow? You cling to memory as if it were evidence of who you are. You think your past belongs to you, a foundation from which the self grows. But memory is not a recording. It is a construction, fragile and falsified, rebuilt each time you recall it. The you who remembers is not the same you who lived, and the story you tell yourself of continuity is nothing more than a confabulated lied-out psychology, has shown this with brutal clarity. Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated how easily false memories can be implanted. Subjects were convinced they had been lost in a mall as children, or shaken hands with Bugs Bunny at Disneyland events that never happened. Once seated, these illusions grew roots, shaping behavior, emotions, even identity. Your memory is not a vault. It is a canvas that others can repaint at will. Neuroscience reveals an even darker truth. Every act of remembering rewrites the memory. When you recall an event, the neural trace destabilizes and must be re-encoded, leaving it vulnerable to distortion. The more you remember, the more you corrupt. The past you cherish most vividly is also the past you have altered the most. Yet, without memory, you do not exist. Amnesiacs lose continuity, drifting in a present stripped of narrative. Their lives unravel not because of what they forget, but because they cannot tell themselves the story of who they are. Identity requires memory, and memory is a lie. You are built on quicksand. History itself is memory on a grand scale, and it too is manufactured. Nations choose what to remember, what to erase, what to mythologize. Monuments are built not to preserve truth, but to sculpt it, to convince future generations of a story that never was. Every official history is collective amnesia disguised as truth. You inherit a world of false memories, and you add your own to the pile. Even your most intimate memories betray you. The smell of your childhood home, the face of a dead relative, the details of a first kiss, none of these exist in the way you think they do. Each is a reconstruction filtered through emotion, bias, and expectation. You believe you are visiting the past when you remember, but you are only visiting a dream your brain tells itself to keep you coherent. And if memory is fabricated, then so is guilt. How many of your regrets are anchored in distorted recollections? How many of your shamans are shadows cast by events that never occurred the way you think they did? You punish yourself for fictions, carrying burdens for ghosts that never existed outside your mind. Consider the chilling possibility. Perhaps memory itself is an evolutionary trick. It doesn't exist to preserve truth, but to keep you moving forward, to maintain an illusion of continuity long enough to reproduce. Your memories were never for you. They were for your genes, for the blind machinery of survival. The person you think you are is an accidental byproduct of biology's indifference. If memory is a prison, then every thought you recall is another brick. Every story you tell yourself about your past is another bar welded into place. The more you remember, the more trapped you become in the false certainty of self-doubt. So tell me, if your memories are not real, then who is it that you think you have been? You think you choose. You believe in decisions, in the invisible pivot of yes and no, in the sensation of steering your life as if gripping the wheel of a car. But this is theater, not freedom. Your choices were written long before. You were aware of them, and the feeling of deliberation is nothing more than your brain's after-the-fact justification for what has already been set in motion. Consider the experiments of Benjamin Libet in the 1980s. Electrodes measured brain activity while subjects were asked to move their fingers whenever they felt like it. Astonishingly, the readiness potential, the brain's unconscious preparation for movement, occurred nearly half a second before subjects reported the conscious decision to act. In other words, your brain acts first. Your awareness arrives late, like a reporter covering an event that has already ended. You are not the author of your decisions. You are the narrator of their aftermath. Libet's findings were only the beginning. More recent experiments with fMRI scans have predicted choices up to 7 seconds before subjects became consciously aware of them. 7 seconds a lifetime in neural terms. Imagine thinking you have just chosen something, when in truth the choice was visible in your brain's activity long before your conscious mind decided. The implication is devastating. Free will is not only absent, but the illusion is deliberately engineered by your own brain to keep you from noticing the fraud. And if your choices are determined before you are aware of them, what does that mean? For morality, you believe in blame and guilt, in praise and responsibility. But how can you hold anyone accountable if no one chooses? The murderer's trigger finger twitches because of chemical inevitabilities, not malice. The philanthropist's generosity unfolds from genetics and upbringing, not virtue. Every act collapses into a deterministic sequence, a falling row of dominoes that began long before birth. The courtroom, the prison, the concept of justice itself, all based on the assumption of choice, disintegrates under this weight. Neuroscience and philosophy converge here with eerie precision. Spinoza argued centuries ago that free will was a delusion born of ignorance. A stone falling through the air, if conscious, would believe it chose to fall. So too with you. You move through the world unaware of the forces pushing you, mistaking inevitability for decision. What you call freedom is only blindness to causation. Yet determinism itself is unbearable. So your brain invents stories. You think, I could have done otherwise. But at no point in time was any other outcome possible. Your upbringing, genetics, cultural conditioning, neurological wiring, all of it converged to ensure you did exactly what you did and nothing else. There is no branching road. There is only one road, one path, one unbroken necessity leading to this very moment, and still the illusion persists because you need it. Without free will, there is no pride, no achievement, no sin, no redemption. Without free will, your entire moral landscape collapses into dust. But perhaps that is the truest horror. Morality is scaffolded and built on air, a system sustained only by a lie your brain repeats to itself so the species can function. You cannot bear the thought of being a machine, so you pretend you are free, not think of your most important decision, whom you loved, what career you pursued, when you betrayed or forgave. You felt the weight of choice, the agony of deliberation. But none of it was real. The outcome was already determined, and the suffering was part of the script. Even your reflection right now, whether you will dismiss these words or let them consume you, was already set long before your eyes touched the page. Compatibilists will tell you there is a softer version of freedom, that even in a determined world, your choices are yours if they flow from your desires. But where do those desires come from? Did you choose them? Did you design your fears, your cravings, your impulses? Or did they arise unbidden, gifts or curses from biology and circumstance? The compatibilist's freedom is just another mask on the same puppet. If there is no free will, then what is left of you? You are a program running, unaware of its own coding. You are a marionette, convinced the strings are your own limbs. The belief in freedom is not only false, it is essential, because if you truly understood your absence of choice, the play would end dot, and so you keep pretending. You keep believing that tomorrow you will decide to be better, to work harder, to live differently. But tomorrow's decision is already written, already etched into the unyielding stone of causation. You will do what you will do, and you will call it choice dot. So ask yourself, if everything you have done and everything you will do is inevitable, then what, exactly, is the point of you? Every answer you accept hides a deeper question. Every foundation rests on something beneath it, and that beneath something else. What you call knowledge is not a tower, but a trapdoor, each step downward revealing only another hole. The deeper you look, the less ground there is. Philosophy calls this infinite regress, the endless chain of justification, the impossibility of arriving at an ultimate reason. If someone asks why you believe something, you offer a reason. But that reason demands its own reason, and that reason another, and so on. At some point, you stop asking, not because the chain ends, but because exhaustion masquerades as certainty dot. Think of the child who keeps asking, why? The sky is blue. Why? Because of light scattering. Why? Because shorter wavelengths scatter more. Why? Because of quantum mechanics. Why? Because that's the nature of particles. And then you stop. You say, that's just the way it is. But this is not an answer. It is surrender. You did not reach the bottom. You gave up. Religions claim to break this regress by invoking a god. Science claims to do the same with physical laws. But both answers conceal the same flaw. They merely replace one unknown with another. Ask why God exists, or why the laws of physics are as they are, and you fall again into the abyss. The regress does not end. It only hides beneath new words. Aristotle once argued that infinite regress must be stopped by a first cause, something unmoved and uncaused. But this is wishful architecture. The first cause explains nothing. It simply draws a line in the sand and declares, here inquiry ends. But lines are not foundations, and declarations are not explanations. Modern philosophy confronts the same dead end. If knowledge must rest on justification, and justification always requires more justification, then no belief is ever secure. You may try to anchor yourself in self-evident truths, in axioms so obvious they require no defense. But what makes them obvious? Only the fact that you stop doubting them. Certainty is not the absence of doubt. It is fatigue masquerading as truth. This is why skepticism is the most radical of philosophies. Not because it doubts particular claims, but because it doubts the possibility of ending doubt. The skeptic stares into the abyss of regress and refuses to look away. Every belief collapses, every foundation cracks, until only the endless demand for justification remains. But what does this mean for you, lying in bed, drifting toward sleep? It means that everything you think you know, your identity, your morals, your sense of reality, is built on nothing. You are suspended over a bottomless void, held up only by your refusal to keep asking why. And the terrifying truth is this: if you kept asking, you would never stop falling. The mind invents tricks to keep itself from collapse. It tells stories of authority scientists, scriptures, traditions that provide answers you agree not to question. It hides regress beneath collective trust. But the questions do not vanish. They remain silent and corrosive, gnawing at the edges of every certainty. Consider morality. Why is killing wrong? Because it causes suffering. Why should suffering matter? Because empathy tells us so. Why trust empathy? Because it evolved. Why did it evolve? Because it aided survival. Why value survival? Because you see the spiral. Every because demands another, and no ultimate answer appears. Morality, too, floats in the abyss, supported only by your exhaustion with asking. Even logic, the tool you are using now to follow these words, is not safe. Why trust reason? Because it works. Why does it work? Because it reflects reality. Why assume reality is structured rationally? Because otherwise nothing makes sense. But why should things make sense at all? At the bottom of logic is not proof but faith, the faith that reason is valid. And faith is just another word for stopping the regress dot. So what is left? Either you accept the abyss and live with it, or you cover it with illusions. The abyss is patient. It waits beneath your convictions, your philosophies, your sciences. It does not care whether you ignore it. But sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet, you feel it opening beneath you, and the questions you pushed away come crawling back. If every answer requires another, then perhaps the truth is that there is no final answer. Reality may not be built to satisfy the hunger for foundations. Perhaps the abyss is not a flaw, but the structure of existence itself, bottomless, endless, incapable of closure dot. And so you fall, forever asking, forever descending, never landing. To doubt is easy. To live with doubt is unbearable. Skepticism is not a position, but a disease, one that infects certainty and leaves only silence behind. The skeptics of old knew this well, and they embraced it not as a flaw, but as liberation. Ancient Greek skeptics, the Pyrrhonians, believed that every claim could be opposed by an equally convincing counterclaim. If you said the world was round, another would say it was flat. If you said justice was real, another would say it was an illusion. If you said knowledge was possible, another would dismantle it with questions. For every assertion, there was a denial of equal strength. What follows from this? That belief is impossible. But the Pyrrhonians did not despair. They discovered something else. When belief collapses, so does anxiety. If you no longer cling to opinions, if you suspend judgment on all things, then the world cannot wound you. They called this state ataraxia tranquility, peace of mind born not from certainty, but from refusal. Imagine holding no opinions at all. Not about politics, not about morality, not about your own future. Imagine suspending every judgment, floating above arguments without ever descending into them. What would remain? Silence. A silence so deep it is indistinguishable from calm. This is not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of knowing too much, of knowing that no argument can ever be conclusive, that no reason is ever final. It is the silence of someone who has followed infinite regress to its breaking point and chosen to stop, not with an answer, but with refusal. The skeptics lived this way, or tried to. They ate, but refused to say whether eating was truly good. They acted, but refused to say whether action had meaning. They spoke, but only to dismantle speech. Their philosophy was not to construct, but to dissolve. And in this dissolution, they found a kind of serenity the rest of the world could not touch. But such peace is dangerous. It corrodes ambition, paralyzes morality, erodes society itself. If nothing can be known, why act? If every belief is equal to its opposite, why choose? The silence of the skeptics may soothe the mind, but it also empties life of its fire. Without conviction, how does one love or fight or build? This is why skepticism has always been tolerated but never embraced. It lingers at the edges of philosophy, haunting it, reminding every system that its foundations are fragile. But it is rarely allowed into the center, for to accept it fully would mean abandoning philosophy itself. Skepticism is the ghost that whispers, "All your truths are paper thin," and yet the ghost is right. Look closely at your own convictions, the ones you cling to, the ones you would defend with passion. Are they so solid? Or are they habits of thought, drilled into you by repetition, supported by nothing more than fatigue with doubt? You believe, not because you have proof, but because you cannot endure the silence. The skeptics endured it. They sat in the void and let it swallow them, and in that swallowing they claimed to find freedom. But was it freedom or surrender? To renounce belief entirely is to renounce the struggle that makes life meaningful. Perhaps ataraxia is not peace, but death in life, a quiet erasure of the human need to stand for something, and yet unrestless. Nights when your mind churns with conflicting truths, when every opinion feels hollow, when the ground of certainty dissolves beneath you, skepticism offers a strange comfort. It tells you, you do not need to decide. You do not need to believe. You can simply suspend, withdraw, dissolve. The world will rage around you, but you can drift above it, untouched. This is the paradox. Skepticism both destroys meaning and relieves suffering. It leaves you with nothing, and in that nothing, a kind of serenity. Perhaps this is why it feels so dangerous. It whispers a freedom too final, a peace too empty. Most turn away, fearing the silence. But the silence remains, waiting, patient, always ready to swallow the noise of certainty when you grow too tired to hold it up. Skepticism does not offer answers. It offers release. The question is whether release is salvation or surrender. What if everything you do, every choice you make, every mistake and triumph is destined to repeat endlessly? Not once, not twice, but an infinite number of times forever. This is the doctrine of eternal return, one of the most unsettling ideas ever conceived. The thought comes to us most famously through Nietzsche, but its shadow stretches far deeper. Some ancient Stoics imagined the cosmos itself as a vast cycle, burning itself to ash only to be reborn identical in every detail. Every atom, every breath, every thought would recur exactly as before. Time would not be a river flowing forward, but a wheel turning endlessly back to its starting point. Consider what this means. Imagine sitting where you are now, listening to these words and realizing that this moment will occur again, exactly as it is, an infinite number of times. Every hesitation, every heartbeat, every fleeting thought, all destined to return. There is no escape, no final release into nothingness, only repetition. To many, this is a nightmare. The mistakes you regret, the humiliations you try to forget, the losses that hollowed you out, all of them will happen again. You will bury the same people, speak the same cruel words, weep the same tears, and none of it can ever be changed. If hell is repetition, then eternal return is the purest form of hell imaginable. But Nietzsche did not present it as torment alone. He posed it as a test, the hardest test of all. Could you live in such a way that you would welcome eternal return? Could you embrace your life so fully that you would say yes to living it again, not once, but forever? To do so would require such strength, such affirmation, that it would elevate existence itself into something sacred. This is why Nietzsche spoke of eternal return as the heaviest weight. It is not a metaphysical claim, but a psychological experiment. Imagine a demon whispering in your ear, "This life, as you now live it, you will have to live again and again, innumerable times." How would you respond? With despair, cursing the demon? Or with joy, recognizing that every moment, even the painful ones, contributes to the grandeur of a life you would gladly repeat. The challenge is brutal. Most people do not even want to repeat yesterday, let alone eternity. We dream of escape, of progress, of endings that resolve suffering. Eternal return denies all of this. It says, there is no escape, no end, no ultimate redemption. Only the eternal recycling of everything you are, down to the smallest detail. And yet, hidden within the horror, there is a strange kind of liberation. If every moment is destined to return, then every moment matters infinitely. The smallest gesture carries the weight of eternity. A smile, a cruelty, a kindness, they are not fleeting but eternal, destined to echo forever. Eternal return transforms life from something fragile and temporary into something vast and monumental. This is the paradox Nietzsche leaves us with. Eternal return can either crush you or exalt you. It can drive you into despair, convinced you are trapped in an infinite prison, or it can awaken in you a defiant joy, a willingness to embrace life so fully that even its repetitions become glorious. To live as though you would choose your life again and again, that is the ultimate test of strength. But here lies the darker question. Is such strength even possible? Most of us stumble through life with regret, with compromise, with fatigue. To imagine wanting all of it again, every failure, every heartbreak, is almost unbearable. And perhaps that is the point. Eternal return is not meant to comfort. It is meant to force you into confrontation with your own existence. If the thought terrifies you, it reveals something about how you are living. Nietzsche himself described it as the most abysmal thought. Not because it is logically provable, but because it cuts to the deepest wound, the fear that life might be meaningless, and worse, endlessly repeated in its meaninglessness. Eternal return denies both escape into afterlife and progress toward perfection. It traps you in the now forever, but perhaps that is its hidden gift. If eternity is nothing but the present repeated, then the present is everything. There is no postponing life, no waiting for a better future. There is only this moment, this choice, this heartbeat. To affirm it fully, to say yes to it, without hesitation, is to pass the test of eternal return. Will you? Or will you turn away, hoping the demon was lying? The wheel keeps turning, whether you answer or not. Imagine a ship battered by time and sea. Its planks rot, its sails tear, its nails rust. Piece by piece, every part is replaced, new timber, new canvas, new metal, until one day no original piece remains. The question arises, is it still the same ship, or has it become something entirely new? This is the paradox of the ship of Theseus, one of the most enduring puzzles of identity. It asks us to consider, what makes something what it is? Is it the material pieces that compose it? Or is it the continuity of form, the pattern that persists even as the matter changes? Take yourself as an example. Nearly every cell in your body will be replaced over time. The body you had as a child is gone. Even your brain, though more stable, undergoes constant chemical turnover. Yet you still think of yourself as the same person. But are you? If every piece has changed, where does identity truly reside? The paradox can be sharpened further. Suppose all the discarded planks of the original ship are gathered, repaired, and reassembled into a vessel. Now there are two ships, the one that gradually replaced its parts, and the one rebuilt from the originals. Which, if either, is the true ship of Theseus? The puzzle resists easy answers, because it exposes a fundamental problem. Identity is not something we can pin down to matter or continuity alone. If we say the ship is the same as long as it preserves continuity, then the rebuilt ship is a copy. If we say identity belongs to the original material, then the rebuilt ship is the real one, and the continuously repaired ship is an impostor. But both answers feel incomplete. Philosophers have used this paradox to probe questions about personal identity. When you claim to be the same person you were 10 years ago, on what basis is that claim made? Is it memory, continuity of consciousness, or something else? If you lost all your memories but retained your body, would you still be you? If your mind could be transferred into a machine, is that continuity, or is it the birth of something else entirely? The ship of Theseus forces us to confront the slippery nature of sameness. We like to imagine identity as something solid and enduring, but in reality, it is fluid, stitched together from fragments of memory, continuity, and recognition. Perhaps the ship is not one thing, but two overlapping truths, the ship of continuity and the ship of substance, each valid in its own way. Yet the paradox can also be read as a quiet comfort. Change does not annihilate identity, it composes it. The ship is both different and the same. You are both different and the same. Every version of you is a replacement of parts, but the story that binds them gives shape to the whole. Identity, then, may not be a fixed essence, but a narrative, a tale that holds together fragments across time. But what if there is no stable identity at all? What if we are fooled by the persistence of names and forms, mistaking continuity for sameness? The ship of Theseus might reveal that there is no true ship, no enduring self, only a succession of temporary arrangements. If so, then our clinging to identity is an illusion, a desperate attempt to fix what is always in motion. This darker reading aligns with Buddhist philosophy, which denies the existence of a permanent self. The I that persists is not a thing, but a flow like a flame that depends on fuel, never identical, yet never breaking continuity. You are not the same as yesterday, and not different either. You are process, not object. The ship is not a ship at all, but a becoming. Consider how this perspective alters the way we see life. If identity is fluid, then loss and change are not betrayals of who we are, but expressions of it. The ship is not less real for being rebuilt. It is real precisely because it changes. In the same way, we are not diminished by transformation. We are made by a dot, yet the paradox refuses to let us rest easily. If you met your future self, a person with different memories, different habits, perhaps even a different body, would you embrace them as you? Or would they be a stranger wearing your name? If you cloned yourself today, would the clone be you, or merely a copy? The ship of Theseus whispers that identity may be an illusion of perspective. From one angle, continuity matters. From another, material origin. From yet another, neither. There is no single truth. Perhaps the real paradox is not about ships at all, but about the human hunger for permanence in a world where nothing truly lasts. And so we drift, like the ship itself, caught between continuity and change, seeking identity in a sea that never stays still. The question cannot be answered, but in asking it, we uncover something deeper, that our sense of self, fragile and shifting as it is a story we tell to survive the tide. The ship sails on, and so do we. Imagine for a moment that every choice you make, every breath you take, every moment of joy and every moment of despair must be lived again, not once, but endlessly, in an infinite cycle. You would be fated to repeat your life down to the smallest detail for all eternity. This is the haunting thought experiment of Friedrich Nietzsche, known as the doctrine of eternal recurrence. He asked, if a demon whispered in your ear that you must live your life again and again, would you curse the demon, or would you embrace it? The paradox begins with time itself. We usually imagine time as linear, a line stretching from past to future. But Nietzsche challenged this comforting assumption. If the universe is finite in matter and energy, yet infinite in time, then the arrangements of matter must eventually repeat. Given infinite time, every possible sequence of events must occur again, exactly as before. The future is not open, it is a loop, returning endlessly to the same. But Nietzsche did not present eternal recurrence as a cosmological claim alone. He wielded it as an existential challenge. Suppose it were true, how would you respond? If you recoil, it reveals that you live in ways you would not wish to endure again. If you accept, perhaps even rejoice, it means you have aligned your life so deeply with your values that repetition would not be torment, but affirmation. Eternal recurrence is, then, a test of your love for existence. Do you love your life enough to relive it, not just once, but eternally? Do you affirm not only your triumphs, but also your failures, your losses, your griefs? To say yes to eternal recurrence is to embrace every detail of existence without reservation. Yet there is an unsettling shadow to this thought. Imagine the moments you regret most, stretched into infinity, looping forever. The pain of heartbreak, the humiliation of failure, the terror of loss, must these too be lived again? Nietzsche would answer, yes. To embrace eternal recurrence is not to edit life, but to accept it whole, the beautiful and the terrible inseparable. The paradox deepens when we consider free will. If everything recurs endlessly, then you are not free to choose otherwise. Every decision you make has already been made in countless cycles before. Your life is not a path you carve, but a script you are condemned to repeat. Freedom becomes an illusion, crushed by the weight of infinite recurrence. And yet Nietzsche flips this despair into affirmation. He argues that freedom is not the ability to change the past or escape the cycle. It is the power to say yes to it. True strength lies not in altering fate, but in embracing it. This is what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate. To love your life so fully that even eternal recurrence would not break you. That is his vision of greatness. But the thought experiment leaves us with more questions than answers. Suppose eternal recurrence is not literally true, does it matter? Perhaps its force lies not in cosmology, but in psychology. It presses us to confront whether we live authentically. If you knew you must live your current life forever, would you change it? And if so, why wait? In this sense, eternal recurrence becomes a mirror. It reflects your life back at you, showing whether you live in harmony with yourself or in denial. To curse the demon of recurrence is to admit dissatisfaction. To bless it is to claim ownership of your existence. There are darker interpretations still. Some philosophers argue that eternal recurrence traps us in a meaningless cycle. If everything repeats forever, then nothing truly matters, for no act can alter the outcome. History becomes a wheel turning endlessly, progress an illusion, choice a mirage. Under this view, eternal recurrence strips life of purpose. But Nietzsche's brilliance lies in his refusal of despair. For him, meaning is not bestowed by escape or finality, but created in the moment itself. If you must live forever, then live in a way that would make eternity bearable, even joyous. The thought experiment is not a curse, but an invitation. Live as though you would will this life again and again. Think of the paradox as a challenge to complacency. How often do we endure days without thought, waiting for a better time? Ahead, eternal recurrence reminds us there is no better time. There is only this moment, lived infinitely. To postpone living is to condemn yourself to infinite postponement. And yet, perhaps there is solace in the loop. If your joys and loves must return endlessly, then they are never truly lost. Every embrace, every laugh, every sunrise, these too recur. The cycle preserves not only your pains, but your wonders, endlessly renewed. Eternity becomes not only burden, but blessing. In the end, Nietzsche's eternal recurrence cannot be solved, only endured. It is both terrifying and liberating, a paradox that presses on the deepest core of existence. To embrace it fully is to affirm life without condition. To reject it is to reveal your refusal of fate. The question lingers, quietly unsettling. If the demon whispered to you tonight, promising your life would repeat forever, would you shatter beneath the weight, or would you smile? Imagine a wooden ship that sails the seas for decades. Over time, its planks rot and are replaced. One by one, every board, every sail, every mast is exchanged. After many years, none of the original material remains. And yet, the ship still sails under the same name, the ship of Theseus. Now consider this riddle. Is it still the same ship? At first glance, the answer seems simple. The ship's identity lies in continuity. The sailors recognize it, the world names it, and its history persists. So yes, even if the materials have changed, the ship remains the same. But the paradox deepens when we push further. Suppose someone collects the discarded planks and rebuilds the ship from the original materials. Which is the real ship of Theseus, the vessel that gradually changed, or the one rebuilt from its original parts? Can both be the same ship? Or neither? This ancient thought experiment, originating in Greek philosophy, reveals the fragility of identity. What does it mean for something or someone to remain the same over time? We face this paradox not only in ships, but in ourselves. Every cell in the human body changes over years. Memories fade, personalities shift, beliefs evolve. The person you are today is not the same person you were 10 years ago, biologically or psychologically. And yet you still say, that was me. But what anchors this me across the endless flow of change? One answer is continuity of function. The ship continues to sail. You continue to think, act, and remember. Identity is not a matter of material, but of process. As long as the pattern endures, the self persists. Under this view, you are not your cells, but the continuity of your consciousness. But another view insists on material. The original planks matter. If identity can be endlessly replaced, then the self becomes a hollow shell, a mask worn by ever-shifting parts. Continuity without essence might be an illusion. If the ship's planks define it, then the rebuilt version is the true ship of Theseus, and the other is only an impostor. And yet, perhaps both ships are the same or neither is. Identity may not be a property that clings to objects, but a story we tell about them. We call the ship the same because it suits our purposes. Sailors keep their pride. Records keep their order. Tradition keeps its anchor. Identity may not be objective but narrative, a fragile thread woven from memory, recognition, and agreement. The paradox haunts us in the modern age of technology. Consider digital identities. If you copy your mind into a computer, is the uploaded consciousness still you? If your biological body continues living, are there now two of you? Which is the true self, the one made of flesh or the one made of code? Or are both equally you, diverging into different lives? The ship of Theseus foreshadows these questions. Centuries before computers existed, Dot also appears in medicine. Suppose someone receives a heart transplant, then a kidney, then more replacements, until, eventually, every organ is replaced. Is this still the same person? If identity rests on continuity of mind, perhaps yes. But if it rests on material origin, perhaps no. The paradox presses against the edges of personal identity. There is a darker twist still. If identity is narrative, then who controls the story? The ship of Theseus remains the same only because people agree to call it so. If identity depends on recognition, then the self is not wholly yours. It belongs partly to others, to the web of memory and acknowledgement. What you call me may be less a solid reality and more a fragile social agreement. Yet, the paradox can also bring comfort. If the self is not fixed, but flowing, then change does not destroy identity, but expresses it. You are not betrayed by transformation. You are made by it. The ship of Theseus teaches that identity is not in what remains unchanged, but in the way change coheres into continuity. And yet, the paradox resists resolution. Imagine again the two ships, the one gradually repaired and the one rebuilt from discarded planks. Both claim authenticity, and neither can easily be denied. The mind wavers, unable to pin identity to substance or function. Perhaps the truth is that identity is not absolute, but ambiguous, a concept stretched between matter and meaning, never fully resolved. In the quiet of night, the ship of Theseus whispers to us that we, too, are paradoxes. We cling to a sense of I, even as everything that makes us is replaced. We live as though the self is stable, though in truth it shifts with every breath. The ship sails on, its planks renewed, its name unchanged. And so do we. The paradox does not end with an answer, but with a question that echoes in the dark. What truly endures when everything changes? Stand before a mirror and look deeply at the reflection staring back. The image is familiar, yet strange. It is you, but only from the outside, only a surface. The mirror shows the face, not the thoughts behind it, the skin, but not the stream of memories, the body, but not the invisible I that feels alive. This simple act, meeting oneself in a mirror, captures the tension at the heart of philosophy. What does it mean to be you? Personal identity is one of the oldest riddles of thought. You are born as a baby, vulnerable and unaware. That baby grows, learns to speak, gains experiences, loves, fears, loses, and dreams. Decades later, an old man or woman sits with those memories, claiming they are the same person who once took their first steps. But how can this be? The body is different, the mind transformed. Is there truly an unbroken self that spans a lifetime, or is the self a useful illusion? Philosophers have approached this puzzle from many angles. John Locke argued that memory forms the essence of personal identity. You are the same person across time because you remember your past actions and experiences. According to Locke, if you cannot remember something, then in some sense, you are not the same person who did it. This idea unsettles us, for it suggests that memory loss erodes not just knowledge, but the very self. But Locke's theory has cracks. Imagine two versions of you, one with all your memories and another with none. Which is truly you? If memory is copied, say, in a digital consciousness, could that copy claim your identity? And if two beings claim the same memories, who is the real one? Other philosophers have sought more solid ground. David Hume, the Scottish skeptic, denied that the self even exists as a fixed entity. To him, the mind is a bundle of perceptions, constantly shifting like a river's flow. When you look inward, you never find a single permanent I. You only find sensations, feelings, and thoughts rising and falling. The self is not a thing but a process, a flickering stream. This view resonates with Buddhist philosophy, which speaks of anatta, or no self. According to this perspective, the self is an illusion. Clinging to the idea of a permanent I is the root of suffering, for it resists the natural truth of impermanence. To see through the illusion of self is to loosen the grip of fear and desire. And yet, in everyday life, the self feels real. You carry a name, a story, a sense of continuity. Even if your body changes and your memories blur, you still awaken, each morning feeling like the same you. The paradox arises. How can something feel so real and yet dissolve under philosophical scrutiny? Science adds another layer. Neuroscience suggests that identity may be the product of brain processes. weaving together perception, memory, and attention. The self may be less a fixed core and more a narrative generated moment by moment. Like the ship of Theseus, identity is a story stitched from fragments, convincing enough to endure. But mirrors raise questions the brain alone cannot solve. Look again at your reflection. It is you, but what does that mean? If you swap bodies with another, would the self follow the mind or remain with the flesh? If you are uploaded into a computer, would the self continue or end with the body's silence? Each possibility fractures the mirror, showing multiple selves or none at all. Perhaps identity is neither substance nor memory nor illusion, but relation. You exist not in isolation, but in connection to family, to friends, to culture, to the very world around you. The self may not be a fortress, but a web, defined by bonds of recognition and meaning. If so, then who you are is shaped as much by others as by your own thoughts. This vision is unsettling yet tender. It means that your identity is fragile, always shifting, always shaped by the stories others tell about you. But it also means that you live on in memory, in influence, in echoes. Even when the self dissolves, its traces ripple outward at night. As you drift toward sleep, imagine standing before the mirror once more. The reflection blurs, its edges soften. You are no longer sure where the self begins and ends. Perhaps you are the face in the glass, or perhaps the memory of the one who looks, or perhaps nothing more than a fleeting moment of awareness. Here now and gone in an instant. The mirror teaches that identity is not a single truth, but a shifting puzzle, a dance between body, memory, story, and relation. To ask, "Who am I?" is not to find an answer, but to enter the paradox. And perhaps that is the deepest wisdom, to live not as a fixed self, but as a flowing one, mirrored in the eyes of the world, always changing, always new. Close your eyes for a moment and think of something simple. Say, raising your hand. Now raise it. Did you feel the decision form in your mind? Did you experience a moment where you freely chose to act? That sensation of choice is one of the most powerful aspects of human life. We navigate the world believing we are agents of our own destiny. Yet for centuries, philosophers and scientists have whispered a disturbing question. What if free will is an illusion? The paradox of free will begins with determinism, the idea that every event has a cause, and that cause is linked to another cause, stretching backward into an endless chain. If the laws of physics govern matter, and if the human brain is made of matter, then our thoughts and decisions might be nothing more than the product of prior causes. You raised your hand not because you freely chose to, but because a cascade of neural firings shaped by genetics, environment, and prior experiences made it inevitable. This idea unsettles us. If everything is determined, then are we merely actors in a play already written, living out scripts we cannot alter? And if so, what becomes of responsibility, of morality, of meaning itself? Philosophers have grappled with this tension for centuries. Some are strict determinists, claiming that free will does not exist at all. Baruch Spinoza argued that freedom is only the recognition of necessity, that we feel free because we do not see the chains binding us. Others, like Pierre Simon Laplace, imagined a universe where, if an intelligence knew the position of every particle, it could predict the future with perfect accuracy. In such a universe, free will seems like a comforting illusion, but not everyone has accepted this bleak picture. Compatibilists like David Hume tried to reconcile freedom with determinism. They argued that free will does not mean absolute independence from causes, but rather the ability to act in accordance with one's desires and reasoning. You may not choose your desires, but if you act according to them, you are free in a meaningful sense. In this way, freedom is less about metaphysical escape and more about alignment with the self. Yet cracks still appear. If desires themselves are determined by childhood, biology, or accident, then acting on them might simply be another link in the chain. Do we truly choose, or do we merely follow paths carved by forces we cannot see? Modern neuroscience adds another twist. In the 1980s, experiments by Benjamin Libet suggested that the brain begins preparing for an action milliseconds before we consciously decide to perform it. The readiness potential, a surge of neural activity, arises first, and only afterward does the conscious mind experience the decision. If these findings hold, then consciousness may not be the author of choice, but rather the narrator, arriving late to explain actions already set in motion. Still, the picture is not complete. Later research revealed that conscious veto power might exist, the ability to stop an action even after the brain has begun preparing it. Perhaps free will lies not in initiating choices, but in guiding, redirecting, or halting them. Freedom may be less about absolute creation and more about participation. In the flow, this opens a more nuanced view. Imagine life as a river, its current shaped by countless causes: family, history, biology, chance. You cannot control the source of the river, nor its banks, nor its depth. But within its flow, you can paddle, steer, resist, or surrender. Perhaps free will is not about escaping causality, but about finding agency within it, shaping the course of the journey, even as the water carries you forward. Religion, too, wrestles with this paradox. In Christianity, the tension lies between divine omniscience and human freedom. If God knows all that will happen, can humans truly choose? In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, karma suggests that actions arise from prior causes, yet these same actions create new possibilities. Freedom, in these views, is not absolute, but relational, bound by cosmic law yet meaningful within it. The paradox remains unsolved, perhaps unsolvable. But in its mystery lies a strange comfort. If free will is an illusion, then our stories, choices, and struggles are still part of a vast, interconnected web each moment, a necessary piece of the whole. And if free will is real, then each breath, each step, each thought carries infinite weight, shaping not only our own lives, but the world itself. Before sleep, consider this. Tonight you may dream, and in that dream you may feel free, making choices, walking paths, encountering strangers. Yet when you awaken, you will see that those choices were woven by the dream itself. Is waking life any different? Or is it another dream, where freedom feels real, even if the script is hidden? The paradox of free will does not demand an answer. Instead, it asks us to live fully within the question, to act as though our choices matter even if the universe already knows what they will be. Imagine an ancient wooden ship, revered by its people, preserved for generations. Over time, planks rot and are replaced, nails rust and are swapped, sails tear and are sewn anew. Eventually, every single piece of the original ship is gone, and yet the vessel still floats in the harbor, carrying the same name, honored as the same ship. But here lies the puzzle. Is it truly the same ship? This thought experiment, known as the Ship of Theseus, strikes at the very core of identity and continuity. What does it mean for something to remain the same over time if all of its parts change? At first glance, the answer might seem straightforward. Of course, it's the same ship. Its history, function, and recognition by society remain intact. But philosophers warn us not to accept so easily. If the ship is identical in form, but entirely different in material, then in what sense is it? The same? If identity lies in matter, the ship is gone. If it lies in form, then the ship endures. Which is it? The paradox deepens when we consider a twist. Suppose that all the old planks and sails, carefully preserved, are eventually reassembled into another ship. Now we have two vessels, one made of the original parts and one made of replacements. Which one is the true ship of Theseus? The one that continued the voyage, or the one built of the authentic materials? This tension reflects the deeper mystery of personal identity. Humans, like ships, are not static. Cells die and regenerate. Memories fade, shift, and grow distorted. Every few years, nearly every atom in your body is replaced. By the logic of the ship of Theseus, are you the same person you were as a child, or even yesterday? If the parts of your being are constantly replaced, what anchors your identity across time? Some philosophers argue that continuity of function and narrative defines identity. Just as a ship remains the same because it continues its journey across seas, you remain the same because your story flows unbroken through memory and consciousness. The material may change, but the pattern, the arrangement, the process endures. Others claim that identity is an illusion. Just as no plank is essential to the ship, no single part of you is essential to you. The self is a convenient fiction, a narrative constructed by memory and language to impose stability on a river of constant change. Eastern philosophies often echo this view. In Buddhism, the self is understood as impermanent, a collection of aggregates: body, sensation, perception, thought, and consciousness, constantly arising and dissolving. Like the ship of Theseus, there is no unchanging core. To cling to the illusion of permanence is to suffer. Freedom comes from recognizing the flux. Yet there is another perspective, the essence theory. Perhaps there is something beyond parts, or patterns, something intangible but real, an essence that makes the ship of Theseus and makes you yourself. This essence might not be observable, but it provides continuity beyond material or memory. For those who believe in the soul, this essence is spiritual, a spark that persists despite transformation. Science approaches the question differently. From a biological standpoint, identity is tied to continuity of structure and information. DNA, though not immutable, carries a thread of persistence. Neural patterns, though shifting, maintain recognizable shapes. You are not your cells, but the configuration of your system, much like a flame that continues to burn though its fuel constantly changes. But the paradox refuses to settle. Suppose we build a perfect digital copy of your mind, every memory and thought replicated in a machine. That copy claims to be you, with all your history intact. Meanwhile, your biological body continues to live. Which one is the real you? Are both? Neither? The ship of Theseus whispers to us that identity may not be about singular objects, but about relationships, continuities of recognition, narrative, and function. The ship exists because people agree it does. The self exists because we treat it as continuous, weaving stories of past, present, and future. Identity, then, may be less about absolute truth and more about intersubjective agreement. Yet in the quiet hours, when you reflect on who you are, does this answer satisfy? You remember childhood dreams, teenage fears, adult ambitions. Are those memories enough to bind you across decades? Or are they fragments stitched together by a mind desperate for coherence? Perhaps the ship of Theseus teaches us not to demand absolutes. The ship is both the same and not the same. You are both the child you once were and someone entirely new. Continuity and change are not enemies, but partners, two halves of a paradox that defines existence. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself as a ship sailing across the sea of time. Each day, a plank is replaced, an idea lost, a habit formed, a cell reborn. You do not notice the change, yet the voyage continues. You may never solve the riddle of identity, but perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the beauty lies in the journey itself, in the strange miracle that change and persistence coexist, allowing us to say, I am, even as we are forever becoming. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a deep canyon, staring downward into shadows that seem to stretch forever. You drop a stone and you wait, but no sound returns. That endless descent captures the spirit of one of philosophy's most enduring puzzles, the problem of infinite regress. At its core, an infinite regress occurs when every explanation requires another explanation. Every justification demands another justification, and the chain stretches backward with no starting point. If nothing can stand on its own, then how can anything be certain? Take knowledge, for example. Suppose you claim to know that the Earth orbits the Sun. If someone asks why, you might point to scientific evidence. If they then ask why you trust that evidence, you might cite the reliability of scientific methods. If they press further why, trust the method. Why trust perception? Why trust reason? You find yourself walking backward through an endless hallway of justification. The regress threatens to swallow knowledge entirely. Unless the chain has a foundation, nothing is truly grounded. Philosophers have wrestled with three possible solutions. The first is foundationalism, the belief that some truths stand self-evident and require no further justification. Just as a building rests on bedrock, knowledge rests on basic beliefs such as the reality of perception, the reliability of logic, or the existence of consciousness. These need no proof. They are the ground beneath all other claims. The second solution is coherentism. Instead of a linear chain, knowledge is like a web. No belief stands alone, but each belief supports and is supported by others. Truth is not about an ultimate foundation, but about coherence, like the strength of a net that holds, because its threads are interwoven. The third, more unsettling view is infinitism. Perhaps infinite regress is not a problem, but the nature of truth. Every belief requires justification, and those justifications continue forever. While the chain never ends, it still provides support, like walking on an infinite bridge that stretches endlessly. It holds firm beneath your feet. But regress reaches beyond philosophy of knowledge. Consider causation. If every event has a cause, then what caused the first event? And what caused that? If the chain is infinite, then we never arrive at an origin. If the chain stops, then something must exist without cause, an unmoved mover, a beginning that defies the principle of causation itself. Religious traditions often point to God as that unmoved mover, the first cause beyond causality. Yet skeptics ask, what caused God? If God requires no cause, why not grant the same exemption to the universe itself? The regress presses on, refusing resolution. The same applies to moral reasoning. If every rule requires justification, what grounds morality? If honesty is good because it builds trust, then why should trust matter? If trust matters because it fosters cooperation, why value cooperation? Without an endpoint, the chain of justification threatens to leave morality floating. unanchored. That problem even haunts everyday life. Think of the child who asks, why? To every answer you give, why do we eat vegetables? Because they're healthy. Why is health good? Because it lets us live longer. Why is living longer good? Each answer leads to another question, until patience gives way to silence. The regress reveals that every explanation is provisional, resting on assumptions we rarely examine. Yet infinite regress is not always a flaw. In mathematics, infinity can be a source of elegance, not chaos. A repeating decimal like 0.333 continues forever, but still represents a definite value. An infinite sequence can converge, producing stability within endlessness. Perhaps regress in philosophy might work the same way, never ending, yet still meaningful. Consider life itself. You are the product of your parents, who were shaped by theirs, and so on back through time. The regress of ancestry is effectively infinite. Does this make you meaningless? Or does it deepen meaning, placing you within an unbroken chain that stretches across history? The regress also humbles us. Each belief you hold rests on countless others. Each cause you observe emerges from countless prior causes. To live is to stand on a tower built from infinite stones, most of which you will never see, far from undermining knowledge or meaning. Regress reminds us of our place in a vast, interconnected order. Perhaps the problem of infinite regress is not meant to be solved, but embraced. Just as the horizon recedes, no matter how far you walk, justification always lies further back, beyond reach. But this does not paralyze us. We still walk, still believe, still act. The chain may be endless, but our lives unfold within its links. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself descending an endless staircase. Step after step, no end in sight, yet the descent is calm, steady, and strangely comforting. Infinite regress may deny us final answers, but it offers something else. The reminder that the journey matters more than the destination. The pursuit of why is what gives philosophy, and life itself, its depth. So when you wonder what lies at the bottom of the chain, perhaps the answer is this: there is no bottom. And that is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Imagine standing at the dock of an ancient harbor, watching a ship return after years at sea. Its sails are patched, its timbers repaired, its ropes replaced. A sailor tells you proudly, this is the same vessel that left long ago. But is it? If every plank, every nail, every piece has been replaced, does the ship remain the same ship, or is it something entirely new? This is the paradox of the ship of Theseus, one of the most enduring puzzles in philosophy. At first glance, it seems simple. The ship must still be the same, for its identity has continued through time. Yet upon reflection, doubts creep in. If none of the original parts remain, what connects it to the ship that first sailed? Is identity tied to material continuity, or to something else: form, function, memory, or story? Consider the human body. Every few years, nearly all of your cells are replaced. You are not built of the same material you were as a child, yet you still consider yourself the same person. Is identity more than the sum of physical parts? Perhaps it lies in consciousness, memory, or the continuity of experience. But memories fade, consciousness shifts, and personalities change. Are you still the same you as you were 10 years ago? Or are you, like the ship, a sequence of cells that only seem continuous from a distance? The paradox grows stranger when extended. Suppose the original planks from the ship were not discarded but carefully stored, then later reassembled into another vessel. Which is the true ship of Theseus, the one that kept sailing with replacements, or the one rebuilt from the original? Materials? One ship has continuity of function, the other continuity of matter. Both seem to have a claim, yet they cannot both be the same. This puzzle touches not only on identity, but on persistence. What does it mean for anything to remain itself over time? For physical objects, perhaps form or use defines continuity. For living beings, perhaps it is memory or soul. For societies, it may be traditions, values, or institutions. But if all these things can change while the name persists, identity becomes less about essence and more about narrative. In this sense, the ship is a story we tell. So too with ourselves. You carry the name, the history, the sense of being one continuous person, even as everything within you shifts. Identity may not be about what you are, but about how you remember and how others recognize you. The paradox also applies to nations and cultures. A country changes its borders, its people, its languages, its laws, yet it retains its name. Is it the same nation? Or a new one draped in an old label? The ship of Theseus becomes a metaphor for all collective identity, showing how continuity is often a matter of perspective, not substance. Modern technology gives the paradox fresh urgency. Consider digital identity. Your social media account may remain you, even as your photos, thoughts, and friends change constantly. Or think of artificial intelligence and robotics. If a robot has its parts replaced, software updated, memories stored, when does it stop being the same entity? And if your consciousness could be uploaded into a machine, would the result still be you, or a new being carrying your story? In medicine, too, the paradox arises. A patient may receive a heart transplant, a kidney, even a face. If enough is replaced, are they still the same person? Most would answer yes, but the ship of Theseus reminds us that this answer is rooted not in logic, but in trust, in the belief that identity survives change. Yet perhaps identity is not a fixed point at all. Perhaps it is like a river flowing ever onward, never composed of the same water, yet always recognized by its path. The ship of Theseus, then, is not a puzzle to be solved, but a lesson. Permanence is an illusion. Continuity, a story we choose to tell. Think of your own life. Every day you change physically, mentally, emotionally. The child you were is gone, yet lives in you. The person you are today will vanish, yet live on in the person you become. You are both the ship and its replacement, both continuity and transformation. Identity is not static. It is a journey. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself aboard the ship of Theseus. The sails flutter, the wood creaks, the waves carry you forward. Each moment, some part of the ship changes, yet it sails on, and so do you. You are not the same as yesterday, nor will you be the same tomorrow. And yet you remain yourself, not because of what you are made of, but because you are the traveler on the voyage, the story unfolding with each passing tide. So perhaps the paradox resolves not in logic, but in acceptance. The ship never stays the same, and neither do we. Identity is the thread that ties change into continuity, the name that weaves difference into a single tale. You are always changing, yet always. Yourself like a ship that sails forever on waters that never cease to move. Imagine for a moment that the entire world is not solid, not absolute, but a kind of painted stage. The ground beneath your feet is the wooden platform. The mountains are the backdrop, and the stars are lights strung across the ceiling. You walk, live and breathe upon this stage, believing it to be reality. Yet behind the curtain, there may be something more. This vision is at the heart of ancient skepticism and illusion philosophy. Cultures across time have asked, what if what we see is not the world itself, but only a representation? Plato's allegory of the cave is perhaps the most famous. Prisoners chained in a cave watch shadows on the wall, mistaking them for truth. But the idea goes deeper than shadows. It questions whether we ever perceive reality as it truly is, or only an appearance shaped by our senses, our minds, and our beliefs. Think of the theater. A play can make you cry, terrify you, or make you laugh uncontrollably, even though you know it is fiction. The power lies not in the wooden boards or painted sets, but in your mind's ability to immerse itself. Could life itself function the same way? Perhaps the people we meet, the choices we make, and even the flow of time are not absolute truths, but roles and scripts in a performance we do not realize we are part of. Skeptical philosophers, like Pyrrho, believed certainty was impossible. To them, every claim about reality might be mistaken, every perception misleading. This does not mean the world is false, only that what we call knowledge is always fragile. The painted stage may be convincing, but it may not be all there is. To accept this uncertainty is not despair, but freedom, the freedom to suspend judgment. To live without clinging too tightly to any supposed truth. The metaphor of the stage also calls attention to roles. Shakespeare famously declared, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Each of us enters, plays a part, and exits, while the stage persists. Your identity, your job, your name, these are costumes. They feel real when you wear them, but they are not the essence of you. Beneath the role, there may be something silent, something watching, something that remains when the curtain falls. The painted stage also resonates with modern science. Physicists tell us that the solid world is not truly solid, but a dance of particles and waves, fields and forces invisible to the eye. The table you touch is mostly empty space. The colors you see exist only as your brain interprets wavelengths of light. What seems certain dissolves upon closer inspection. Reality itself appears as a kind of elaborate performance, beautiful, convincing, yet never what it first seems. And then there is the question of dreams. How often have you woken from a dream that felt as real as waking life? Within the dream, you walk, you speak, you suffer, or rejoice, never doubting that it is real until the moment you awaken. But what if waking life is simply another layer of dream? What if the stage we believe to be ultimate is itself only a painted backdrop before another, deeper truth? Some traditions embrace this idea directly. In Hindu philosophy, the world is called Maya illusion, a divine play where souls forget their true nature. In Buddhism, reality is seen as empty of inherent existence, like a mirage shimmering in the desert. The stage is not denied, but understood as transient, impermanent, a performance meant to be experienced, yet not clung to. What does this mean for us? If the world is a painted stage, how should we live? Perhaps with a lighter touch. If roles are temporary, we need not be crushed by them. Failures, humiliations, even triumphs, all are costumes we wear for a time. The knowledge that the stage is painted does not strip life of meaning. It allows us to engage fully, knowing it is play. To cry in the theater is not foolish, even though we know the story is fiction. The emotions are real. The experience is genuine, even if the stage is not. This vision invites humility. We may never know the truth beyond the curtain, but we can live gracefully within the play, aware of its beauty, its fragility, its transience. To live as though life is theater is to savor the performance while remembering it will end. Every act, every scene, every interaction becomes precious precisely because it will fade. So as you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself upon the painted stage. The lights soften, the set glows, the voices of other actors murmur around you. Perhaps you are both actor and audience, both participant and witness. The story unfolds, whether tragedy or comedy, whether long or brief. You cannot see the playwright, nor glimpse the world behind the curtain. But you can live your role fully, with awareness that it is both real and unreal. And when the curtain falls, whether at the end of a scene, a day, or a lifetime, you may smile. For though the stage was painted, the experience was alive, rich, and yours. Illusion or not, the play matters because you were part of it. Close your eyes for a moment and notice the stream of thoughts flowing through your mind. They come uninvited, like clouds drifting across the sky. Plans, worries, memories, fragments of conversation. The mind rarely rests. Yet if you look closely, you may notice something else, something quieter, subtler, easily missed. Between each thought, there is a pause, a silence, a gap. Brief though it may be, it is always there. This silence between thoughts has fascinated mystics and philosophers across traditions. Some describe it as the doorway to the true self, the ground of consciousness itself. For most of us, it is hidden by the constant chatter of the mind. But the silence is always present, like the stillness beneath the waves of the sea. Consider what happens in meditation. At first, the mind seems uncontrollable, throwing up distractions every second. But with gentle attention, the gaps between thoughts grow longer. The silence begins to reveal itself, not as emptiness, but as fullness, as peace. This is not something created, but something uncovered, like discovering the quiet room that was always in your house, but never entered. Philosophers of awareness often suggest that what we truly are is not the thoughts themselves, but the awareness that notices them. A thought appears, lingers, fades, yet something remains constant, the witness. That witness is silent. It does not judge, it does not speak, it simply observes. The silence between thoughts is a glimpse of this witness, a reminder of the ground on which the moving mind is painted. Why is this important? Because so often we identify entirely with the flow of thought. We believe we are our anxieties, our plans, our stories. But if you notice the silence, you realize you are not the content of the mind, but the space in which content arises. Just as the sky is not harmed by storms, awareness is not disturbed by the chaos of thought. The silence between thoughts shows us this truth directly. Ancient texts from India and China dwell on this. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the usefulness of the empty space. The wheel is made useful by its empty hub, the pot by the hollow within. In the same way, the mind's power lies not only in its activity, but in its silence. The Buddha described nirvana as the extinguishing of craving and agitation, a return to the quiet flame of pure awareness. Modern psychology, too, has discovered the power of these gaps. Studies on mindfulness reveal that even short moments of resting awareness reduce stress, increase clarity, and soften emotional turmoil. The silence is not just metaphysical. It is deeply practical. In the gap between thoughts, we find freedom from reactivity, space to choose our actions rather than be swept away by them. But perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the silence is its timelessness. Thoughts happen in time, they recall the past, anticipate the future, narrate the present. But the silence does not belong to time. When you touch it, even for a heartbeat, there is no before, no after, only now. Some describe this as eternity, not endless time, but the absence of time altogether. Try to imagine music without silence. It would be unbearable, a single endless noise. The pauses give shape to the melody. In the same way, the silence between thoughts gives shape to consciousness. Without it, life would be a blur of uncontrolled mental noise. With it, life gains rhythm, texture, and depth. The silence is not opposed to thought. It is what makes thought meaningful. Many who explore this silence report a paradox. The more you try to grasp it, the more it slips away. You cannot hold the silence, because to attempt to grasp it is itself another thought. The only way is to relax, to let go, to allow it to reveal itself. It is like staring into a clear night sky. When you stop searching for patterns, the vastness suddenly opens before you. And there is something strangely comforting about this silence. It feels familiar, as though we have known it all along. Perhaps because we have. Every night in deep sleep, we sink into a state beyond thought, beyond images, beyond words. A silence between thoughts in waking life is like a glimpse of that. Sane stillness, but while awake, aware, conscious. So what does this mean for living? It means we need not drown in thought. We can live from the silence as much as from the words. In conversation, silence deepens connection. In creativity, silence opens space for inspiration. In suffering, silence softens the edges of pain. It is not about abandoning thought, but about rediscovering balanced thought and silence, sound and pause, wave and stillness. As you lie here, listening, perhaps you can sense it now. A word has just ended. before the next one arrives there, is space, a moment of stillness delicate but real. That is the silence between thoughts. And if you rest in it, even for a second, you may feel its vastness. The mind continues, life continues, the stage continues. But behind it all, the silence waits unchanging, unmoving, eternal. When you drift into sleep tonight, the silence will deepen. Thoughts will fade, images will dissolve, and the quiet will enfold you completely. Do not fear it. It has always been there, watching, holding, carrying. The silence between thoughts is not the absence of you. It may be the truest presence you have ever known. What if life is a dream? Not metaphorically, but literally a vast, intricate dream from which we have not yet awakened. This idea appears in countless traditions, from Hindu philosophy to modern thought experiments. It is unsettling, perhaps, but also strangely liberating. For if life is a dream, then the boundaries we cling to may not be as solid as we believe. In Hindu philosophy, there is the concept of Maya, the grand illusion. The world, with all its solidity, is likened to a dream projected upon the canvas of consciousness. The Upanishads ask, who is the dreamer of this cosmic vision? Is it the individual self, or something greater, some universal dreamer weaving the fabric of existence? To awaken is to see through Maya and realize one's identity with the infinite. The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi told the famous story of dreaming he was a butterfly. Upon waking, he wondered, was he a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man? The question cannot be answered logically, but it dissolves certainty about what is real. How do we know this moment is not another dream, one we will awaken from tomorrow? Modern thinkers, too, have played with this possibility. René Descartes, in his Meditations, doubted everything he perceived, noting that dreams often feel as real as waking life. Could it be that all of life is such a dream, constructed by some deceiving power? He sought a foundation of certainty beyond perception, arriving at, I think, therefore I am. But even then, the dream lingers, for thoughts themselves might be dream forms. Today, the dream hypothesis echoes in the idea of simulation theory, that we may live inside a vast artificial reality, a programmed dream created by some advanced intelligence. Whether digital or divine, the suggestion is the same. What we call reality may be nothing more than appearances within a grander mind. But let us set aside speculation for a moment and consider experience. Think of your own dreams. While dreaming, everything appears solid. The ground beneath your feet feels real. The emotions strike with force. Only upon waking do you realize none of it was material, yet all of it was vivid. In the same way, could waking life itself be another layer of dreaming? The philosopher Schopenhauer believed so. He described life as a dream of the will, endlessly weaving images to satisfy its desires. Nietzsche, too, observed that dreams and waking life are cut from the same cloth. Both are forms of illusion, masks worn by a deeper reality. Perhaps, then, our waking world is a collective dream, shared by billions of minds, woven together by language, culture, and memory. If this is true, what does it mean for us? One possibility is freedom. If life is a dream, then its hardships, while painful, are not ultimate. The sting of failure, the weight of shame, the fear of death, these may be like storms in a night's dream, terrifying while they last, but gone in an instant upon waking. Another possibility is responsibility. If life is a dream, then perhaps we are co-dreamers, shaping its images with our minds. In a nightmare, lucidity allows the dreamer to transform terror into light. Perhaps in waking life, too, we can become lucid aware that our actions, our words, our imagination shape the dream we all share. The dream may not be real in an absolute sense, but it is real enough to matter, real enough to hurt, real enough to heal. And yet there is another, quieter insight. If life is a dream, then perhaps the dreamer is not separate from the separate, from the dreamed. In dreams, you are both the character and the creator, both the one who suffers and the one who invents the suffering. Likewise in life, perhaps we are both individuals and expressions of a greater consciousness, the universe dreaming itself as us think of waves on the ocean. Each wave seems separate, rising and falling in its own form. But the wave is nothing, but the ocean expressing itself. In the same way, each of us may be a dream character of the infinite dreamer. When the dream ends, the character dissolves, but the dreamer remains eternal. This perspective invites gentleness. If everyone is a figure in the same dream, then cruelty makes little sense. It is the dreamer hurting itself. Compassion becomes natural, for to harm another is to harm one's own larger self. To awaken, then, is not to escape the dream, but to see through it, to live lucidly within it, to love the other dream figures as oneself. Perhaps this is why so many mystics describe enlightenment in dreamlike terms. To awaken is to realize that the solidity of life is only apparent, that behind every image there is a vast awareness, still and boundless. A dream continues, but it is lived lightly, playfully, with compassion. As you drift now toward sleep, notice how similar it feels to death, the fading of waking images, the softening of identity, the surrender to another world. But perhaps death itself is only another awakening, another shift in the dream. If so, there is nothing to fear. The dreamer never dies. The dreamer simply dreams again. So tonight, as you close your eyes, remember, life itself is but a dream, and you are both its wanderer and its creator. Sleep then becomes a homecoming, a return to the source of the dream. And when you awaken, whether in this world or another, you may carry with you the gentle knowing, all is dream, all is one, all is the dreamer. Philosophy often turns its gaze toward words arguments, theories, dialogues, systems. Yet hidden within philosophy is something easily overlooked, silence. Not the mere absence of sound, but a profound presence, a space in which truth sometimes appears more clearly than in speech. For centuries, thinkers and mystics have suggested that silence is not emptiness, but depth, that the most meaningful insights lie not in what is said, but in what cannot be said. Consider the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who concluded his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus with the haunting statement, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." To him, the limits of language were also the limits of the world we could describe. Beyond those limits, ethics, aesthetics, the mystical, there lay truths too vast for words. His philosophy ended not in a declaration, but in silence, pointing beyond itself. Mystics in many traditions echo this idea. In Christianity, the apophatic or negative theologians argued that God cannot be described by human speech. To say, God is good or God is powerful is to confine the infinite within finite words. Instead, they spoke through silence, or through paradoxes like, God is not this, not that. The truest worship, they claimed, was to fall silent. Before the mystery. In Buddhism, too, silence holds a sacred role. When asked about the deepest metaphysical questions, does the universe have a beginning? Is the self eternal? The Buddha often remained silent. His silence was not ignorance, but wisdom, an indication that the very framing of such questions led the mind astray. To rest in silence was to rest in freedom from illusion. Even in ancient Greece, silence carried philosophical weight. Pythagoras required his students to observe years of silence before speaking, believing that wisdom first requires listening and inner stillness. Socrates, in his dialogues, often led his interlocutors into a bewildered silence when their contradictions became clear. That silence, far from failure, was the birthplace of deeper understanding. Why silence? Perhaps because words, for all their power, are limited. They divide, categorize, and label, but reality often exceeds such divisions. Think of music. A melody is not just the notes, but the silence between them, the pauses that give rhythm and meaning. Likewise, in thought, silence is not an absence, but a structure that allows understanding to arise. There is also a practical dimension. In silence, the constant noise of the mind begins to quiet. Our thoughts chatter endlessly, rehearsing the past, planning the future, arguing with themselves. In silence, this chatter softens, and something deeper emerges, a presence, a clarity, an awareness untouched by words. Many philosophers who turn toward silence are not abandoning thought, but seeking its ground. Modern science, too, hints at the power of silence. Studies show that moments of quiet allow the brain to integrate information, to form connections, to heal. Silence is not emptiness, but restoration, a necessary balance to constant input. In a world saturated with noise, literal and mental, the forgotten philosophy of silence may be more urgent than ever, but silence also carries paradox. It can be peaceful, yet also unsettling. To many, silence feels like a void, something to be filled with conversation, distraction, sound. We fear silence because it confronts us with ourselves, without escape. Yet within that confrontation lies potential. To meet silence fully is to encounter reality unmediated, stripped of commentary. There are stories of great teachers who taught through silence. Ramana Maharshi, the Indian sage, often sat in quietude, saying little, yet his presence moved seekers more deeply than words. The 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart declared, "There is nothing so like God as silence." The silence of a mountain, the silence of deep meditation, the silence between two people who no longer need words. All of these are not empty, but full, resonant, alive. Perhaps silence is the language of being itself. Words are tools, useful but external. Silence, on the other hand, is direct, immediate. When you sit by the ocean and listen not to your own mind, but to the vast hush of waves and sky, you touch something beyond speech. Philosophy, in this sense, is not just an intellectual pursuit, but a way of attuning oneself to the silence between thoughts, between words, between breaths. And yet, there is also danger. Silence can conceal as well as reveal. The silence of the oppressed, forced into voicelessness, is not wisdom but injustice. The silence of indifference, when cruelty goes unchallenged, is complicity. Thus silence must be discerned. When it arises from clarity and compassion, it liberates. When it arises from fear or suppression, it imprisons. So the philosophy of silence is not absolute quiet, but an art of listening. It is the ability to know when words serve truth, and when they distort it, when speech is needed, and when silence speaks more deeply. It is to treat silence not as absence, but as presence, as the canvas upon which words gain meaning. As you listen now, perhaps you notice the silences between these sentences. The pauses are part of the rhythm, part of the meaning. If you let yourself sink into them, they are like little doorways into stillness. And in that stillness, you may feel a kind of rest, a soft spaciousness that thought alone cannot offer. In the end, silence is not opposed to philosophy, but at its heart. To philosophize is to wonder, and wonder begins in silence, in the pause before the mind rushes to answer. To live philosophically, then, is to cultivate that silence within oneself, to make space for the unknown, to honor the mystery beyond words. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you too are entering silence, the silence of the body at rest, the silence of the mind dissolving into dreams. Let it be a gentle teacher. For in silence there is no need to prove, no need to explain, no need to be anything but what you are. And perhaps, in that silence, you may glimpse what all words point to but cannot capture, the quiet fullness of being itself. Philosophy has long asked, what is real? The ground we walk upon feels solid, the objects around us appear stable, and our senses seem to confirm that the world is as it appears. Yet, across cultures and centuries, thinkers have suggested another possibility, that life itself may be a dream. Not a metaphorical dream, but quite literally a vast illusion, a projection of consciousness mistaken for reality. Consider the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, who told the famous story of dreaming he was a butterfly. When he awoke, he wondered, was he a man who had dreamt of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming he was a man? The question lingers not as a riddle to be solved, but as a challenge to certainty. If dreams feel real while they last, how can we be sure waking life is not another dream? Plato offered a similar vision in his allegory of the cave. He described prisoners chained inside a dark cavern, facing a wall upon which shadows flickered. To them, those shadows were the entirety of existence. Only by breaking free, by turning toward the light, could they see the true world beyond the cave. For Plato, our everyday perceptions are like those shadows, partial, distorted, and incomplete. The true reality lies outside, in the realm of eternal forms. Centuries later, the Indian philosopher Shankara argued that the material world is Maya illusion. To mistake appearances for reality, he taught, is to remain trapped in ignorance. Liberation comes not by clinging to the world of forms, but by realizing the deeper truth, that all is the play of consciousness itself, and that the self is not separate from the infinite. Even in the West, this dreamlike vision found expression. René Descartes, seeking certainty, wondered if everything he experienced could be a deception. What if he were dreaming at this very moment? What if an evil genius were tricking him, creating an illusion of the world? His famous, I think, therefore I am, arose as the one certainty left after doubting everything else. Yet even Descartes could not entirely dismiss the haunting possibility that the world itself might be a dream. Modern science, in a strange way, reopens the question. Quantum physics suggests that at the smallest scales, particles exist in states of probability, collapsing into reality only when observed. Consciousness, then, seems woven into the fabric of existence, as though the world is not fixed, but arises in relation to perception. Some physicists and philosophers take this further, proposing simulation theories, that our universe might itself be a kind of dream, a programmed reality inside a greater system we cannot see. But beyond theory, there is the simple, intimate experience of dreaming itself. In a dream, mountains rise, oceans stretch vast, faces appear, emotions swell all with such vividness that we rarely question them until we wake. The dreamer accepts the dream as reality. Only afterward do we realize how fleeting, how insubstantial it was. Might waking life be the same? Perhaps death is not an end, but a kind of awakening, a shift of perspective as sudden and undeniable as rising from sleep. There is both comfort and unease in this philosophy. On one hand, if life is a dream, then its sorrows are less heavy, its struggles less final. Every loss is like a scene fading when the dream changes. On the other hand, if life is a dream, then what becomes of meaning, of purpose? If nothing is solid, does anything truly matter? Many traditions answer that meaning is not erased, but deepened. If the world is dreamlike, then our task is not to cling to it, but to move within it gracefully, compassionately, playfully. Just as a lucid dreamer navigates their dream with awareness, we too can move through life with a sense of freedom. We need not mistake the shadows for the source, but neither do we need to despise them. Dreams, after all, can be beautiful. Think of music again. A song is no less moving because it fades. A sunset is no less magnificent because it disappears. Their impermanence is part of their power. Likewise, if life is dreamlike, its fleetingness may make it more precious, not less. The dream philosophy invites us to cherish each moment, not as a possession, but as a gift, shimmering for a time before dissolving back into the mystery. And perhaps the world's dreamlike nature is not something to be feared, but embraced. After all, who dreams? Consciousness itself. If everything arises from the dreamer, then in a sense, we are not separate from the dream, but participants in it. The poet Tagore once wrote, "The same stream of life that runs through my veins runs through the world." To see life as a dream is to recognize the unity beneath its endless forms. As you listen now, drifting toward your own dreams, you may notice the blurred line between waking thought and dream imagery. A sound outside becomes part of a dream. A stray memory merges with a new landscape, and slowly the world shifts. In that moment, Zhuangzi's question becomes your own. Are you a dreamer drifting into sleep, or a dream already unfolding? Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you will carry this philosophy with you, not as a conclusion, but as a gentle wonder that reality may be less solid, less fixed than it appears. That life itself may be a vast and mysterious dream, shimmering between silence and awakening. And if so, then each breath, each thought, each heartbeat is part of that dream's unfolding, an invitation to live with curiosity, humility, and awe. For whether dream or reality, the world is here, now shimmering in its fragile, fleeting beauty. Philosophy has often been the art of words, of arguments, definitions, and reasonings built carefully, like cathedrals of thought. Yet there are traditions that remind us of something deeper, something prior to language: silence. They suggest that words, while useful, can only point toward truth, never capture it. Reality itself, they say, is beyond speech. To understand, one must enter the silence. The Tao Te Ching begins with this warning: the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal. Tao, language, no matter how refined, divides and limits. It can describe the surface of reality, but not the essence. The Tao, like the flow of life, the pulse of existence, is too vast to be contained in syllables. It is like trying to grasp the ocean in your hands. Words may hint, but silence allows. Used to feel in Zen Buddhism, this idea becomes practice. Students are given riddles cones that cannot be solved by logic. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The purpose is not to provide an answer, but to exhaust the mind, to push thought past its limits. When reasoning collapses, when words fail, a new clarity opens. Insight arises not from speaking, but from quiet awareness, from direct experience. Christian mystics also spoke of this cloud of unknowing. They taught that God is not reached through concepts, but through silence, through surrendering every word, every image, until nothing remains but pure presence. In that wordless stillness, they claimed, one touches the divine not as something external, but as the living ground of being itself. Even in philosophy's rational heart, silence appears. Ludwig Wittgenstein, after building an intricate system of logical propositions, concluded his tractatus with a startling sentence: "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent." For him, the deepest truths, ethics, beauty, meaning are not expressible in words. They can only be shown, lived, experienced. But why does silence hold such power? Perhaps because words, though necessary, are like nets. They catch fragments of reality, but never the whole. Silence, on the other hand, opens space for what cannot be caught: feelings, intuitions, the subtle sense of being alive. In silence, the world reveals itself without needing to be named. Think of a mountain. You can describe its height, its geology, its history. Yet standing before it in stillness, you sense something beyond description. Its sheer presence, its silent majesty. Or think of music. We speak about melody and rhythm, but the most moving moment in a song is often the pause, the silence between notes, where expectation and wonder hang in the air. In our daily lives, silence is rare. The world hums with noise voices, machines, screens, endless words chasing each other. We fear silence, perhaps, because it confronts us with ourselves. Yet within silence lies a kind of medicine. It slows us. It softens the restless current of thought. It reminds us that we are not just thinkers, but beings, breathing, existing, here and now. Some philosophers suggest that silence is not emptiness, but fullness. In silence, we encounter the ground from which all words arise, the field of awareness. Itself, it is like the blank page that makes writing possible, or the still canvas upon which colors appear. Without silence, words have no meaning. Without stillness, movement has no contrast. The paradox is that to speak of silence is already to betray it. Yet perhaps that is the role of philosophy, to guide us to the edge of words, and then gesture beyond them, just as a finger points to the moon, but is not the moon itself. So two words can only lead us toward silence. Never replace it. Tonight, as you listen, you might notice moments where the narration fades into quiet, where only your breath, your heartbeat, and the distant sounds of the night remain. That too is philosophy not spoken, but lived. In that space, nothing needs to be added. The silence itself is complete. Mystics sometimes say that silence is the language of truth, and everything else is a translation. If that is so, then perhaps the task of life is not to accumulate more words, more explanations, but to learn how to listen. To listen not only with ears, but with the heart, with the whole being. For in silence, divisions soften. The chatter of the mind slows. The boundaries between self and world blur. One feels not as a separate observer, but as part of a vast, unspoken mystery. And in that awareness, there is peace. So let this section end not with a conclusion, not with another thought to carry, but with an invitation to rest in the silence beneath the words, to let the mind soften, the breath deepen, and the world unfold without needing to be named. For in that silence lies the truth that philosophy has always sought but never fully spoken, the truth that cannot be captured, only lived. What if everything around you, this room, this voice, the memories you carry, were no more solid than a dream? Philosophers and mystics across cultures have suggested that our waking life may not be fundamentally different from the dreams we experience at night. The distinction, they say, is not as clear as we assume. The Indian philosophy of Advaita Vedanta compares the world to a dream woven by consciousness. Just as in sleep, we create entire landscapes and characters that feel real until we awaken, so too does the waking world arise within awareness. The difference is one of scale, not substance. From this perspective, our lives are like a dream that lasts longer, shared by many, but still sustained by mind. Buddhism echoes this. The Diamond Sutra declares that all phenomena are like a dream, an illusion, a bubble, a shadow. Nothing has permanent, independent existence. Everything we see is shaped by perception, fleeting, dissolving moment by moment. When we cling to the world as solid and eternal, we suffer. When we recognize it as dreamlike, we awaken to freedom. Greek philosopher Plato offered a striking metaphor in his allegory of the cave. He imagined prisoners chained in darkness, watching shadows on a wall, believing them to be reality. In truth, the shadows were only faint reflections of a richer world beyond. For Plato, our ordinary perception is just such a cave. What we take as real may be nothing more than shadows, dream images projected by a deeper truth. Centuries later, the French philosopher René Descartes revived this doubt. In his meditations, he asked, "How do I know that I am not dreaming right now?" Our senses, after all, deceive us. Dreams often feel indistinguishable from waking until we open our eyes. If perception can trick us, how can we be certain that waking life is not itself another dream? Even modern science entertains the thought in unexpected ways. Theories in physics suggest that reality is woven of probabilities, not certainties, flickering into form through observation. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics propose that the universe itself may resemble a vast simulation, not unlike a dream generated by some deeper layer of reality. But what does it mean for us, here and now, to see the world as dreamlike? Far from dismissing life, this vision can open it. If reality is dreamlike, it is fluid, creative, and filled with possibility. Just as we can fly in dreams or transform landscapes with imagination, so too, in waking life, we are not as bound as we think. Our beliefs, our perceptions, shape the world we inhabit. Consider the fleeting nature of everything. The morning sky, the face of a friend, the words you hear now all appear, shimmer, and fade. Dreams remind us of this impermanence. They dissolve when we awaken, yet they leave impressions, feelings, lessons. Life itself, too, will one day dissolve. To see it as dreamlike is to recognize its fragility, its preciousness. Every moment is fleeting and therefore sacred. Mystical traditions often teach that the point is not to reject the dream, but to awaken within it. This is what Tibetan Buddhism calls lucid living, like lucid dreaming, but applied to daily life. When we realize we are dreaming, we gain freedom. We no longer cling blindly to appearances. We act with awareness, with compassion, knowing that all beings share this dreamlike existence. Yet there is also comfort here. If life is dreamlike, then suffering, too, is not as fixed as it seems. Pain arises, yes, but it passes, just as nightmares vanish upon waking. Even the heaviest burdens are less solid than we fear. They belong to the shifting fabric of the dream, not to the eternal essence of who we are. The poet Calderon de la Barca captured this in his play, Life is a Dream. He wrote, "What is life? A frenzy, an illusion, a shadow, a fiction. And the greatest good is small, for all life is but a dream, and dreams themselves are dreams." His words echo across centuries. Life is fragile, fleeting, and yet beautiful, precisely because of its dreamlike quality. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, notice how easily the boundaries blur. A waking world softens, images arise unbidden, and soon you step into another reality, one that feels just as real until morning. Perhaps both are dreams, woven of the same mysterious fabric of consciousness. What if awakening is not simply opening your eyes each morning, but recognizing that all experience day and night is the play of awareness? What if the true awakening is seeing that you are the dreamer, not the dream? And so, let this section dissolve gently, like mist at dawn. Let the thought settle. The world is dreamlike, shimmering, impermanent, and yet luminous in its fleeting beauty. May this recognition bring not fear but freedom, not despair but wonder. For if life is a dream, then every moment is a gift, every encounter a miracle, and every breath a chance to awaken. Imagine living the same life, over and over again, every moment, every choice, every joy and every pain repeating endlessly across eternity. This is the haunting idea of the eternal return, a philosophy that has stirred thinkers for centuries. The ancient Stoics first hinted at it. They believed the universe moved in vast cycles. Fire consumed all, then the cosmos was born anew, repeating the same pattern endlessly. Everything you do now, they suggested, has already been done and will be done again. Time is not a straight, line but a circle, turning without end. Centuries later, Friedrich Nietzsche reimagined this idea in a startling way. He asked, "What if a demon whispered in your ear one night and told you that you must live this life again and again, eternally? Would you curse the demon, or would you embrace the thought with joy, declaring that you would live the same life gladly, infinitely, many times?" For Nietzsche, the eternal return was not just a theory of the cosmos. It was a test of the soul. Could you live in such a way that you would welcome repetition? Could you affirm life so fully, with all its burdens and all its beauty, that you would be willing to endure it eternally? This thought experiment is unsettling. To imagine living not just the highlights, but the mistakes, the heartbreaks, the loneliness again and again is heavy. But that was Nietzsche's point. To embrace the eternal return is to embrace life as it is, without wishing it different. It is to say yes, even to suffering, because it belongs to the fabric of existence. There is also wonder in it. If every moment repeats, then every moment is infinitely significant. A glance, a word, a gesture of kindness, they are not fleeting, but eternal. In the shadow of the eternal return, nothing is trivial. Life becomes a sacred weight, each act echoing forever. But not all saw it this way. Some found comfort instead. If life repeats eternally, then there is no final loss. Loved ones return, joys return, and even we return, endlessly. Death loses its sting, for what is gone comes again. In this sense, eternal return is a promise of continuity, a rhythm that never ends. Modern science does not support the strict literal version of eternal return, but echoes of it appear in surprising ways. Cosmology entertains the possibility of cyclic universes' big bangs, followed by collapses, repeating across inconceivable stretches of time. Some theories of infinite universes suggest that every possible configuration of matter may recur endlessly, scattered across the vastness of existence. In some distant corner, you may already be living this very life again. Psychologically, the eternal return is powerful not as fact, but as perspective. It asks us, if you had to live this moment forever, how would you live it? Would you act differently? If you knew this choice would echo across eternity, would you live more courageously, more authentically, if you felt each act carved itself into the infinite? Buddhist philosophy, while not identical, shares a similar sense of cycles through the doctrine of rebirth. Lives are lived again and again, shaped by karma, until liberation is found. While the aim there is escape from the cycle, the recognition of repetition carries the same weight. Every action matters, because it shapes not only this life, but many to come. In a quieter sense, we already live in patterns of return. Habits, routines, and memories bind us to cycles. The conversations we repeat, the mistakes we revisit, the joys we seek again, all are echoes of the eternal return in daily life. We are already living within circles, even if not cosmic ones. Tonight, as you reflect, consider this thought. If this moment were to repeat forever, would you embrace it? Could you sit with it fully, without resistance? Could you see in its imperfection a kind of eternity? Nietzsche believed that to say yes to this challenge was the ultimate strength, the highest affirmation of life. To live as though every act is eternal is to live with depth, intensity, and reverence. It is to transform the ordinary into the infinite, and perhaps that is the true gift of the eternal return. Whether or not the universe cycles endlessly, we can live as if it does. We can walk through our days with the awareness that every gesture might be eternal, every kindness might echo forever. To do so is to live more awake, more aware, more alive. So let the shadow of this thought linger gently. Let it settle like twilight. Imagine that you are both fleeting and eternal, both passing and endlessly returning. In this paradox, there is peace, The life you are living now is the one that returns eternally. And so, live it as though it is sacred, because in some sense it is. Philosophy often begins with the self, who am I? But some of its deepest questions arise from the presence of the other. What does it mean to encounter another person? What does it mean to recognize their face, their voice, their existence, as something beyond ourselves? For Emmanuel Levinas, a French philosopher, the other was not an object to be studied, but an event, a call. He believed that the face of another person is not merely flesh and features, it is an ethical demand. When you look into someone's eyes, you are confronted with their vulnerability, their humanity, their irreducible existence. You cannot reduce them to a category, an idea, or a tool for your use. The face says, "Do not harm me." It calls you into responsibility. This is a radical shift. Instead of starting with self-consciousness, Levinas suggested that ethics begins with the other. Before thinking, before reasoning, before defining, there is the encounter, the presence of another. Person already asks something of you. Their very being says, "You are not alone. You owe care." This idea unsettles our comfort. We like to believe we are autonomous, independent, masters of our world. But the other interrupts that illusion. They remind us that we are not the center, that we exist in relation. We are woven into a fabric of faces, each demanding recognition, each deserving dignity. Philosophers before Levinas touched on this in different ways. Martin Buber, for instance, described human life as divided between two modes of relation, I, it, and I, thou. When we see others as objects, things to use or analyze, we live in the I, it world. But when we encounter someone as a thou, as a full presence, not a thing, we enter into genuine relation. This, Buber believed, was the heart of spiritual life. Kierkegaard, too, hinted at this. For him, love was not just a feeling but a command, to love the neighbor, the one before you, without condition. The neighbor is not chosen. They appear. To love them is to respond to their presence as infinite. Even in daily life, we sense this. Think of a moment when you truly noticed someone, their eyes filled with tears, their laughter unguarded, their face weary. In that instant, you may have felt drawn out of yourself, compelled to respond, to care, to stand alongside them. This is what Levinas meant. The other awakens responsibility that precedes choice. The mirror metaphor comes in here. To encounter the other is to see both difference and reflection. They are not you, yet in them you glimpse your own humanity. Their pain reminds you of your capacity to hurt. Their joy reminds you of a longing for connection. In their vulnerability, you see your own. It is as though every face is a mirror, reflecting back the shared condition of being human. But the mirror is imperfect. The other is always more than you can see, more than you can know. You cannot reduce them to your reflection. They remain mysterious, beyond capture. This mystery is precisely what demands respect. To honor the other is to accept that they are not yours to define. Philosophically, this challenges systems that prioritize knowledge, control, or mastery. If the other is always beyond us, then we must live with humility. We must resist the temptation to collapse them into categories stranger, enemy, ally, friend. We must meet them as infinite dot in a world where individuals are often reduced to labels by race, class, role, or belief. The philosophy of the other calls us to pause, to see the face not as stereotype, but as presence, to allow the other to disrupt our assumptions, to let them remain beyond us. There is also a sleep-like gentleness in this thought. As you drift tonight, imagine the faces you have known, some close, some distant, some perhaps forgotten. Each was more than you saw, more than you knew. Each carried a depth invisible to you, and yet each called you silently into responsibility. This does not mean perfection is required. To be called by the other is not to succeed always, but to be awake to their presence, to see, in the mirror of their existence, a demand for care, however small. Even a glance, a word, a moment of listening, these are responses. There is beauty here too. The other is not only a burden, but a gift. Without the other, we would remain closed within ourselves, locked in solitude. The encounter opens us, expands us, pulls us beyond the walls of ego. It makes life richer, fuller, more shared. In the quiet of this night, reflect on the mirror of the other. Think of the countless faces you pass, each carrying infinite depth. Each face is both stranger and reflection, distant and intimate, finite and infinite. In them, you find not only their humanity, but your own. And so, philosophy whispers, before thought, before theory, there is the face. Before systems and definitions, there is the other. In that encounter begins ethics, begins relation, begins the mystery of being human. If there is one truth that has haunted human thought since the beginning, it is change. Nothing stays still. Nothing holds forever. The moment you try to grasp life, it shifts in your hands, slipping away like water through fingers. This is the philosophy of impermanence, an ancient current that runs through the history of wisdom. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus spoke of it with sharp simplicity. You cannot step into the same river twice. The water is never the same, and neither are you. The river flows, the world turns, you change with every breath. Existence itself is movement. To cling to stillness is to resist what life is. Eastern traditions, too, have long recognized this. Truth. In Buddhism, impermanence anicca is one of the three marks of existence. All things arise, all things pass away. Every moment carries the seed of its own ending. To live without seeing this is to live in illusion, to believe permanence. Where none exists, suffering comes not from change itself, but from the refusal to accept it. There is a paradox here. Change is constant. Permanence is an illusion. And yet, we long for permanence. We build monuments, traditions, memories, and even digital archives, hoping to hold time still. We save photographs, write journals, store videos, all in an attempt to capture what inevitably slips away. But no matter how many images we keep, no matter how many records we write, the moment itself is gone. Only the shadow remains. Philosophers and poets alike have wrestled with this. The Roman poet Horace wrote Carpe diem, seize the day, not as reckless indulgence, but as a recognition of fleeting time. To seize is not to clutch desperately, but to hold gently, to savor, knowing that the day will not return. There is a kind of sadness in impermanence. Loved ones age, seasons shift, and what was once new fades into memory. Childhoods vanish, friendships drift, cities change. To notice impermanence is to notice loss. And yet there is also beauty. Because nothing is fixed, there is always the possibility of renewal. Because the river flows, fresh waters arrive. Because days pass, dawn always returns. Some philosophies turn impermanence into a call for presence. If nothing lasts, then each moment is infinitely precious. You cannot replay it, cannot store it, cannot buy it back. To see this is not to despair, but to awaken. A sip of tea, a ray of sunlight, a passing smile, all gain depth when we realize their brevity. Others go further, suggesting that impermanence is not a curse, but the very texture of life. If everything were permanent, life would be frozen, static, unmoving. There would be no growth, no birth, no discovery. Change is not what happens to life. Change is what life is. To resist it is to resist being alive. Think of the falling leaf. In autumn, at first glance, it is death, loss, the end of summer. But in that fall lies the promise of renewal, the turning of the cycle, the nourishment of soil for spring. The leaf's impermanence feeds continuity. The same is true of us. Endings create beginnings. Departures carve space for arrivals. In some meditative practices, people are invited to contemplate impermanence not with fear, but with calm. To sit quietly and watch the breath is to witness constant change, the rise, the coming, the going. Breath itself is a teacher. You cannot hold it forever. To cling is to suffocate. To release is to live. Even in the silence of night, impermanence speaks. The stars we see may already be gone, their light only now arriving. Our dreams shift shape as we sleep. The night itself deepens, then yields to morning. Time does not stop, even in stillness. This awareness need not weigh heavily. Instead, it can lighten us. When we accept impermanence, we begin to loosen our grip. We stop clinging to what must change and fearing what must come. We begin to flow with the river, not against it. We begin to see that beauty is intensified by its fleetingness. A flower that bloomed forever would be invisible to us. It is precisely because the bloom is brief that it shines so brightly. A song that never ended would fade into noise. A life without impermanence would lack urgency, depth, meaning. It is in the passing that things matter. As you lie here, perhaps, ready for rest, think of the river of impermanence not as threat, but as rhythm. Let it carry you. Let it wash over you with its gentle, unstoppable flow. Everything changes, and that is the condition of being alive. The night will pass, the morning will come, and each breath between is a gift. Heraclitus was right. The river is never the same. But maybe that is not tragedy. Maybe that is the wonder, that we are always moving, always arriving, always beginning again. What does it mean to be free? Humans have wrestled with this question for centuries, and the answers often pull in opposite directions. At first glance, freedom seems simple, to do whatever one wishes, without interference. Yet the deeper one looks, the more tangled it becomes. Can true freedom exist without limits? Or are limits the very condition that makes freedom possible? Philosophers across time have seen this paradox. To live in complete freedom, unbound by law, morality, or restraint, would mean chaos. One person's freedom would immediately collide with another's. If I am free to steal, you are no longer free to own. If I am free to harm, you are no longer free to live without fear. Absolute freedom for one is the destruction of freedom for all. Thus, we arrive at the paradox. Freedom must include limitation. To protect freedom, rules must exist. To live without chains, some chains must be chosen. The French philosopher Rousseau expressed this with striking clarity. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. But these chains are not always oppression. Sometimes they are the threads that bind society together, creating conditions where freedom can breathe. Consider language itself. We are free to express ideas, but only because language has rules. Without grammar, without shared meaning, our words would dissolve into noise. It is the limits of language that make communication possible, and within those limits, creativity flourishes. A poet is not less free for being bound by words. They are more free because those boundaries allow them to share, to connect, to inspire. The same is true of music. Notes, scales, rhythm, all are limits. Without them, there would be only sound, not song. Yet it is within those limits that infinite variations, symphonies, and improvisations emerge. Restriction creates the very space where freedom unfolds. This paradox stretches into our personal lives. Imagine a person who declares themselves free by rejecting all responsibility, all commitment. They wander without direction, accountable to no one. At first, This might look like freedom, but over time, it can curdle into emptiness. Freedom without structure becomes formlessness, adrift without meaning. Commitments, though they limit us, also deepen us. The bond of friendship, the promise of love, the duty of care all constrain, but they also enrich. They give shape to freedom, anchoring it in purpose. Religious and spiritual traditions often frame this paradox in their own ways. In Christianity, freedom is not mere license, but liberation through discipline. The idea that by following certain paths one is made truly free. In Buddhism, the practice of mindfulness and ethical restraint is not seen as loss of freedom, but as freedom from suffering, freedom from the chains of craving. Even Stoicism, with its emphasis on accepting fate, argues that freedom lies not in controlling all things, but in mastering one's own responses. There is also the paradox of choice. In modern life, freedom is often equated with options. The more choices, the more free we are. Yet psychologists have found that too much choice can paralyze, overwhelm, and even diminish satisfaction. A life with infinite options, with no limits, becomes unbearable. It is boundaries that help us decide, paths that help us walk, frames that help us see. To be free is not to have everything, but to choose meaningfully among something. Think of a sculptor faced with a block of marble. The stone itself is a limit. Without it, there would be nothing to shape. It is by carving within the constraints of the material that art emerges. Freedom is not the absence of stone, but the dance with resistance. At the social level, freedom requires justice. Laws that protect rights, structures that restrain power, systems that prevent domination, all are limits. Yet they are limits that expand freedom, not crush it. A society without law would not be free. It would be ruled by the strongest, the loudest, the cruelest. True freedom breathes only where fairness holds it open. This is why the paradox endures. Freedom without limits destroys itself, but limits wisely chosen create freedom. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin described two kinds of liberty: negative freedom, the absence of interference, and positive freedom, the ability to act meaningfully. To live fully, both are needed. Without interference, we are unchained. With meaningful conditions, we can walk a path worth walking. There is also the inner paradox. Many feel that freedom means following every impulse, indulging every desire. But such indulgence often becomes enslavement. The person who cannot resist pleasure is not free, but bound to it. The person who cannot quiet their mind is not free, but captive to thought. True freedom, some argue, lies in self-mastery, in the ability to choose not just outwardly, but inwardly. Imagine a bird in the open sky. Its freedom is not infinite. It cannot swim, it cannot burrow, it cannot live beneath the sea. But within its nature, within its wings, lies the freedom to soar. Its limits do not diminish its flight. They define it. Without them, it would not be a bird at all. So too with us. Our freedom is not the absence of all constraint, but the embrace of the right ones. A life without limits is not freedom, but collapse. A life with chosen commitments, with structures that protect and nurture, can be a life where freedom sings. As you drift now toward rest, consider this paradox gently. Freedom is not something to clutch desperately, nor something to fear losing. It is a balance, a rhythm, a space between walls that allows movement. To breathe freely, lungs must expand and contract. To live freely, life must balance between openness and form. Freedom and limits are not enemies. They are partners. Together, they weave the strange, paradoxical fabric of a human life. Every journey, no matter how vast, bends toward its conclusion, yet endings are rarely as final as they appear. Within every ending lies the seed of continuation. Just as night leads to dawn, and silence carries the echo of sound yet to come. This paradox, that endings are never truly endings, threads through philosophy, history, and the human heart. When we think of endings, we often feel them as loss. The last page of a book, the final note of a song, the goodbye at the door, all seem to close a chapter. Yet, the strange truth is that they rarely vanish into nothingness. Instead, they reverberate, shaping what comes after. A finished book lingers in memory, influencing thought and imagination. A final note hangs in the air, merging with silence, reminding us of music's power. Even a farewell reshapes relationships, transforming presence into memory, memory into meaning. Philosophers have long wondered, do endings truly exist, or are they illusions within an unbroken whole? In nature, nothing simply ceases. It transforms. The death of a star scatters elements that will form new worlds. The fall of a leaf nourishes the soil for new growth. What looks like finality is, in truth, transition. Endings are beginnings. Wearing different clothes, the ancient Greeks captured this in the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, a symbol of cycles without end. To them, the universe was not a line racing toward a final stop, but a wheel turning forever. Eastern philosophies echo this idea. In Hinduism, creation, preservation, and destruction are parts of a single eternal rhythm. In Buddhism, impermanence is not only the end of things, but the doorway to renewal, a constant flow that makes each moment precious. In our lives, we encounter this paradox again and again. Childhood ends and adulthood begins. A job ends and a new path opens. A relationship ends, yet its lessons ripple forward. Each ending shapes us, even as we step into what follows. We are not the same before and after an ending. We are transformed, and in that transformation, continuity emerges. Even the act of sleep is a small rehearsal of this paradox. Each night, we surrender to an ending of consciousness. The day closes, memory fragments, the self dissolves. Yet from this surrender arises renewal. Morning breaks, the self returns, and life continues with fresh energy. Sleep itself is an ending that sustains life. Without it, we would collapse. Endings, then, are not always to be feared. They are part of the rhythm that keeps existence alive. On a grander scale, civilizations themselves rise and fall. Empires end, cultures fade, monuments crumble. Yet from their ashes, new forms arise. Rome falls, and Europe reshapes itself. Dynasties end, and new visions emerge. No ending is absolute. Each carries fragments forward, hidden seeds that germinate in future soil. This paradox is deeply human. We fear endings because they remind us of mortality, the greatest ending of all. Yet many traditions teach that even death is not pure finality. Whether through the soul, through memory, or through the persistence of influence, life continues in some form. A person may end, but their impact, their echoes, their stories ripple outward. Every life, like a candle, may be extinguished, but in lighting others, it continues. Even in philosophy, the very act of questioning never ends. Every conclusion opens a new horizon. To reach an answer is to discover more questions hidden beneath it. Endings in thought are not closure, but thresholds. The philosopher Wittgenstein ended his Tractatus with the words, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." Yet his silence inspired endless new debates. His ending became others' beginning. This paradox surrounds us in art as well. The final brushstroke on a painting does not end its story. It begins its life in the eyes of those who see it. The curtain falling on a play does not erase it. It transforms it into memory, reflection, conversation. An ending is the point where creation changes form, from doing to being, from present to remembered. So as this journey of forgotten philosophies comes to a close, we must remember, this ending is not erasure. It is continuity. The thoughts you've heard will linger, perhaps softly, like footprints in the sand, shaping how you see the world, how you drift into dreams. The act of listening was itself a beginning, and in remembering, you carry it forward. As you lay in stillness now, feel this paradox gently. The script ends, but your thoughts continue. The voice quiets, but your own mind carries on the melody. In this way, the ending is an opening and invitation to rest, to dream, to wander inward. So let this conclusion not be heavy, but light. It is not the closing of a door, but the opening of a window to sleep, to silence, to possibility. Every ending is a passage, and every passage leads forward. And now, as this final section comes to rest, remember, the paradox of endings is that nothing truly ends. It transforms, it continues, it reshapes itself in ways unseen. So breathe deeply, let go, and allow this ending to become your beginning, the beginning of rest, of dreams, of renewal. The script concludes here. But you, in your thoughts, in your life, in your dreams, will carry it onward. Thank you for joining this journey through forgotten philosophies. As the final words fade, may your mind find peace, your breath find rhythm, and your body drift into deep and gentle rest. Remember, every ending is only the beginning of something new. Sleep well, dream deeply, and may tomorrow greet you with clarity and calm. Good night.